Michael Heiser. He has taken Christianity, he's taken the Old Testament, and now we've introduced this Near Eastern, ancient Near East concept, and it really obscures what you're reading from the Bible. It takes God's word and says the average reader can't understand it. And now we're all left with, oh, well, we just need to go to Michael Heiser. I mean, he's the only one that really gets this now.
Yeah, there's two things with him that scare me, and that is right on the intro of his podcast. I'm the layman, he's the scholar.
All the prophets, all the way up to John the Baptist, were monotheist. This is like totally against Heiser.
Let me read you more from Michael Heiser's essay. This Baal-worshipping garbage has nothing to do with learning about the God of the Bible. Folks, this is satanic. This concept of God having 70 sons, that is satanic.
Well, hello to everyone out there. Brought the Sentinel community along with a few from Heiser's Divine Council Facebook group. It's a special guest here, Gary. Hey, there you are. Yeah, to make a response video to a person named DorianVirtue, who apparently left the New Age, say around 2017 thereabouts, from what I've read of a biography, embraced Christianity. The timing of that is interesting because Heiser's Unseen Realm was released in 2015, which was the year I became a Christian. Heiser's book actually was the last nail in the coffin with respect to my atheism. A lot of the Sentinel fans know about my story. It started in 2010, a 5-year journey of just my Opa's passing, spurring me into an academic look into human anthropology 101. The naiveness of my, at the time when I was 21, the naiveness of just life. The perspectives of life, looking into religion, in the plural sense. And then finally coming across well-known scholars that everyone of the Sentinel community knows, like Hugh Ross, Walton, Heiser, XYZ. All the ministry groups, Biologos, Reasons to Believe, Heiser's Naked Bible. That's where my head was at, and I could see the God question scientifically, like especially through ministries like Reasons to Believe, Hugh Ross's ministry. But what really did it for me was the unseen realm, in the sense that, the subtitle, right? Recovering the supernatural, right? In the sense that it's not the supernatural as, say, the pagan superstitions try to understand the supernatural. In other words, the gods of the nations, even up to the time of Jesus' day, the Greco-Roman concept of what it means to have a supernatural miracle means to break the laws of nature, right? In other words, the laws of nature is this thing that opposes the gods, and the only way to demonstrate that they're deity is to supersede the laws of nature, or to break them or contradict them somehow, like to showcase a victory over the laws of nature. So in other words, it's like a war with the universe, the uniform nature of the universe. And the God of the Bible, as Heiser would then showcase, is the only one that actually works with the laws of nature. The funny thing is, when I see non-biblical specialists like, say, Hugh Ross, infer from certain passages as well as through the scientific method, that, look, if the scientific model, which comes from, how ironic, Christian Europe, this notion that the universe is intelligible, it's governed through this logos principle, like you can actually gain, it's written in the language of maths or something like that, and hence you can actually write laws to define how certain phenomena work. So therefore, why would God need to contradict it or break it to perform whatever action he needs to do. Because if you think about it, the incarnation is probably the ultimate sync God has with the laws of nature. He's not breaking the laws of nature when he's incarnate in that mortal form, right? He's working right in tandem in that hypostatic union, that the God who created the laws of nature, and he's at the same time he's being subordinate to the laws of nature in that incarnation sense, right? So the marrying of the two extremes fascinated me out of all the religions, because Allah doesn't incarnate. None of the Hindu gods, Greco-Roman gods, there's no like from a complete transcendent, nature down to an incarnation to then not leave us alone in the death situation in the grave. So then when I read Psalm 8, what is man, you should take notice of him. You've made him lower than the divine beings. Ooh, that's an interesting statement, but you don't really think about that. You just keep reading, folks, nothing to see here sort of thing, right? But Heiser wanted to just nudge that. No, look at that, because that is used in Hebrews 2. The author of Hebrews 2, who I believe is a female, Priscilla, sort of a minority position, but that's another discussion. She argues that, we do have one who is made lower than the angels. Oh, wow. Notice that. Like, you have God, Yahweh, the two powers in heaven stuff. So the second power descends down. You have the B'nai Elohim category. Then you have the Malachim category. And then down here you have all the rest of the stardust creatures like human beings. So I hold to evolution, for example. So the universe being 13.8 billion years, Earth 4.5 billion years, life 4 billion years. So at the tail end of evolution, these humans emerge. And God looks at that particular species, that creature, as special. Like, he's my imago Dei, right? And then you as a reader, you're looking at Genesis 1 going, how interesting. Not realizing that by the time you reach Hebrews chapter 2, which obviously is a summary of the gospel story, that this very creator who goes, this creature I'm interested in having a relationship with. The creator God becomes that, but or incarnates and tabernacles, as John 1:14 would say. He pitched his tent among us, right? And thereby what that means is he himself also becomes part of that, like Philippians 2, the common Christi. Although he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, kenosis, to become a slave, form of like a human-like form. But then for the goal that the corruptible family council that God already had in Genesis 1, it comes full circle, that those who are conformed to Christ, so think Romans 8:17, to be co-heirs with Christ, co-rulers, co-heirs, to not only share in his suffering, but also to share in his glory, theosis, which is also Hebrews 2. He didn't come to help the angels. How interesting, because to help the angels would imply God would have to incarnate into the angelic realm form to then solve their issue. No. As again, Hebrews 2 says, he didn't come to help the angels. No, he came to help Abraham's descendants, because again, the whole Genesis covenant thing. Hey, when you look up to the stars, not just numerically, but even qualitatively, even their ontology per se, your descendants will be like the star seed, right? Which is the whole point of Paul's argument in Romans 4 and 5, which Heiser then brings up, right? So all of that, I mean, I can't believe I've spoken that fast. Maybe it's because I'm with the panel and I know that I can speak for hours and at a lot slow pace. So I'm just sort of like all this data for the sake of time and the people here. But that then just made me go, oh my gosh, that's like Heiser. This is not, Heiser didn't come up with this stuff. He dot connected, I'm not kidding, 6,600 different works. Okay, his bibliography, if those who remember, before there was a drmsh.com, there was his oldest site. So his Unseen Realm book was called The Myth That Is True. He had a private email exchange group thing, which I was one of the last to finally fall into that category and have the opportunity to get that bibliography. I, along with guess what, the video you just saw, that intro video by Ben Stanhope. Ben Stanhope's name is acknowledged in Unseen Realm as one of those readers or interested readers that Heiser acknowledges in the epilogue of his book. It's like, yeah, these are all the fans during the myth That Is True days that read the draft version. I just want to mention their names. So there's a lot of background context. A lot of people, fans of not only his blog, but also being an academic scholar, especially for Logos and Logos software, and everyone knew him. The endorsements that the book has received. So, for example, Ben Weathering III, massive endorsement. Tremper Longman, right? Walton. I can. These are just names I can just based on memory. All stemming from ultimately his 2004 dissertation, where he speaks of a particular guy named Roger, who his dissertation was with respect to Egypt and Egyptology. And I was able to track down, like he gave a very abbreviated to Roger in the Unseen Realm. But I was able to track down through my university his original dissertation, his 2004 dissertation, which, by the way, the common one that's usually floating around don't have the acknowledgements page. I have that, and there's a much longer acknowledgement about this particular Roger dude and how Heiser considered him the true, in German, basically the true doctor, in the personal sense, because it was Roger who, which, by the way, Ron Johnson, when I shared that particular thing in the Divine Council group on Facebook, it was Ron Johnson that chimed in and left a comment saying that apparently it all happened at a like a dinner table or something, where the three of them were having a meal, and Roger just started basically doing Psalm 82 stuff, which he was the same guy that in church also mentioned the same thing to Heiser. And anyway, so the point is, this is not unique to Heiser. This is not like Heiser going into some sort of Gnostic trance and is like, oh, like Pythagoras going up into the clouds, and as the myth goes, and he discovers the Pythagorean theorem, which then happens to be the theorem that is still applied even today in, let's say, Einstein's field equations. Well, obviously it is, because that's math for you, right? But I'm being a bit facetious and. Yeah.
But don't tell Pythagoras that the theorem was discovered long before him. We're just going to keep. The Babylonians, and exactly like I'm obviously being a bit tongue in cheek, facetious there, but that's true. What we call Pythagorean triples is welcome to math. That's just part of math. It doesn't mean just because we're calling it the Pythagorean theorem that he's like the inventor of the theorem. It's a mathematical rule based on the fact that that's part of the axiom of mathematics that undergirds all reality. So, like calculus, who quote unquote invented calculus? Well, you can't invent a method. And if we were to again try to answer that question, was it Leibniz or Newton? And what's funny is that when we teach, and I'll end it with this, and then we'll get into the topic. But when we're teaching students math, like calculus, we're teaching Leibniz's notation, dy over dx. Newton's notation is y. If you're talking about a derivative of y, it's y with a dot. Like whoop-de-doo. The point is, it means the same thing, right? And at the same time, you don't just glorify Newton or you glorify Leibniz, although I personally am a fan of Leibniz because his theological philosophy is also part of my faith journey.
Anyway, so that being said, I was absolutely shocked, like, with this video that we're going to review. I'll be honest, I only came across Dorian briefly on a Fringe Pop episode, or some sort of like in passing. I don't know if that episode was even live. Maybe Carrie, maybe you can clarify a few of these comments, but
yeah, she was pretty early on in Fringe Pop.
Okay.
So, yeah, you can still go find her video there.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, I this is no offense to Dorian, but I just didn't care. I mean, this may sound rude, but I don't mean it to be rude. The Fern and Andre thing, right? Like, I mean, some episodes that came on Naked Bible, I just didn't have the care to listen. And although I was aware of the whole, the spiritual ministry combating what you and I would call unclean spirit watcher stuff, and that's, the field is ripe when you're talking about, say, third world countries like India and so on, where it's like a given and no one really bats an eye. It's like, oh yeah, which ironically enough Doreen would be familiar with, especially with respect to her past, right? So that stuff I didn't get. In fact, there was another guest that Heiser had on in Fringe Pop, but a male guest. I don't know if you remember him, but he was into the New Age and he came out of it.
Was it Stephen Bancart?
I think that's him. Yeah, he was a youngish guy. I think he had like long hair. Yeah, Stephen, right?
Yeah, Stephen Bear. Yeah,
Bancart. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, again, I only listened. I mean, that video went viral. Like, we're talking nearly like 1 million hits or something, and I only watched it because wow, look at this video, it's getting viral. But I'm listening to it, and it's like I'm not getting anything out. Like, I appreciate the fact that these people are finding salvation and meaning, and they're being saved from all that stuff. Great. But for me, my invested time and interest is in the critical scholarly. In other words, I'm always hungry for, okay, what does Heiser have to share now with respect to the latest in the scholarly, the academia side of things, right? So, yeah, no offense to those people. It's just, that's just me. Okay. So then when I'm seeing Dorian's introduction, putting aside what actually does appear as very rude and very like throwing the Heiser family under the bus sort of, comments. But the way she describes Mike as going out of his way to pay for a lot of things and to accommodate her and to share material that's not even published yet, and it's like, duh, that obviously, that doesn't surprise us, because that's technically the testimonies of a lot of people, even at his funeral. Like, that's just how he was, right? I mean, for example, to use, say, Carl Sagan as an example here, people were shocked that Carl Sagan would write back. Here's this popular guy, and who would have thought Carl Sagan, literally personally responds back to those who used to write him letters back in the 80s. Same thing with me. I couldn't believe it. I would send Mike an email thinking, nah, I'm not going to get a response. Boom, he responds back literally the next day, going, yep, Rob, that's a good insight, or yep, yeah, you can check this out, and yep. And that's how that friendship and that fellowship, and also like a student-teacher mentorship sort of started since becoming a Christian in 2015. And then when I started this channel in 2017, the first live stream, you can click on my channel, go to the live tab, go to the oldest live stream, was with Heiser. And we have someone in here that's been friends with me and a brother in Christ with me ever since, Cloud Rider, who was part of that stream.
I remember that stream. I asked him a question, and the two questions.
And your question was, what's your favorite verse in the Bible or something like that?
What's your favorite verse, and like why is it was the sons of God being angels, and like why the interpretation wouldn't work.
Right.
And then in the background there was a flushing sound.
Yeah. I don't want to bring that up, but you brought it up. But basically, Cloud left someone in the distance in his room or in his house.
It was my
flushed the toilet. But what's funny about Heiser is he is oblivious to a lot of that stuff. Like he continued answering the question as required, and anyway, so so Dorian mentioned those things. So there's a massive introduction, which Kerry, do you think I should play that out or skip straight to the interviews?
Well, I think probably it's better to skip, just because we want to really focus on the arguments and not what she's emotionally bringing to the table.
Right. Yeah. So that being said, we want to, despite despite the sort of in-house reaction that we're having, especially me, I'll be honest, I'm not speaking with respect to the people here. I'm personally angry, and surprised and disappointed, and honestly, I was, like as Heiser would say in his very like dry, sarcastic humor, like I feel a yawn coming over me, sort of thing. Like that, if I allowed that to control the situation, this would be a very unfruitful stream. So I'm gonna put all that aside and go back to what the Sentinel streams are known for, which is sort of like a very cordial sort of just give the responses. So Dorian, I don't know if you'll watch this, but please understand that we are not Heiser-rights. Okay, like I'm going to first just lay out a lot of preface stuff here, and then we'll start this, the video. We're not Heiser-rights or Heiserians or whatever like that. Heiser himself, even in his work, would say he's the dot connector. Okay? Secondly, there's massive hypocrisy on your part, and no offense to anyone here who holds to a certain theological tradition and school, but I'm just going to be blunt. There's a massive hypocrisy on your part to bring on people who, if we were living in those times, how interesting would we ourselves or yourself be critics of those people? So for example, Jordan Cooper, a Lutheran. Did you know that Martin Luther, commentating on 1 Corinthians 1, which I'm sure Jordan Cooper is familiar with, where Paul says, was I crucified for the world? God forbid. Like I know nothing else but Christ crucified. Were you baptized in my name? No. You were baptized in Christ's name. Martin Luther goes, why do you call yourselves Lutherans? I'm just a maggot. This is Luther in his commentary on 1 Corinthians 1. But sure enough, people under his particular tradition and his name, because of the Reformation and everything following, Calvin, who was, by the way, a very young like child when Luther was doing the 95 Thesis, nailing, like, and then his system, then the Calvinist system comes on the scene. And is there I'll just say this right up front, if there was a Heiser system, like Lutherans or Heiserin or something, I would not be part of that group. Okay? Heiser would be shocked by that. All right? Yeah. The reason why, the phenomenon of his work and why it's so popular is because people, we're living in the 2000s and early, say, 2010s, the church was being starved of good, biblical stuff. And for too long, the church started to devolve into feel-good approaches, like the Joel Osteen stuff, a lot of fundy ideas. No offense, but young Earth creationism is in my opinion part of that stuff. And then don't forget 1800s, American phenomena of, say, the Adventist groups, Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witness, all these cults that started to emerge. And meanwhile, you have the high critical approaches in Europe. And then science, Darwin, like top science stuff starts to emerge early 1900s. It's interesting to see that it's only those who are academically orientated at the time and were Christian were the sort of like the mature and careful dot connector of all this data and how they would amalgamate it together. But then the faith walk was also private. And then there's a slow anemic drip where the church, obviously populations grow after the 2 world wars. You have a bifurcation of the world, and the world becoming multicultural, and the internet starts to emerge, and and then other traditions arise, sharing those traditions. So then on top of that, confusion emerges. And so therefore, those who specialize in these very niche fields, whether it's scientific or theological, sort of just remain in their own ivory tower, really. And then there's a constant further disconnect between those scholars and your average Christian, and obviously the pastor of the pew. Heiser was, based on my inkling, he hasn't really said this, so I could be putting words in his mouth, but this is just based on, from what I've seen about his upbringing, and because he himself has said that he only knew about like Adam and Noah and a few names, but he didn't know about all the, granular detail. But based on what I've seen, it seems that Heiser was of a very, when I say conservative, what I mean is, he came across as someone who was a type of pseudo-fundamentalist. And so now when we're going to start the video, when you guys start reacting with the whole, like, he never seen this before, like the whole, Psalm 82, this is his admission that, because I see this all the time, even when I go and, say, meet with very conservative Christians who fall into even the extreme types who like King James only, and those type, where I point out to them and certain verses, and I'm like, hey, so what do you think of this? And they go, wow, we never came across this before. That's what Heiser's getting at, which is thanks to the critical academic engagement of the Bible, which is not to attack the Bible. It's just to put aside all these filters. In other words, are you going to spend literally every day of your life learning Calvin's Institutes? Well, that's not going to get you anywhere in the bigger picture when you're analyzing Ezekiel 1 with respect to Babylonian iconography. And, I can go on and on with these. So that's what Heiser was doing. And then he just put aside, that's how he starts on Rome. He puts aside all these church traditions and creeds and so on, not disagreeing with them. He just says, look, just put these filters down. What's the perspicuity of Scripture with respect to the original author and the original culture? Oh my goodness, suddenly, and then when you allow, those who are trained who then ask the same question to then go and discover, answers to that question, like Second Temple scholarship. So that leads to this thing called the new perspective on Paul. Well, obviously new perspective, because the Reformation is far removed from Second Temple stuff, right? It's not, the new perspective is not disagreeing with the Reformation answer. It's just saying, look, there's a new perspective that you guys, as fallible humans, in your political agenda with respect to Germany and the Catholic Church, and far removed from the fact that there's this thing now called Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls and all these other super graphical texts, and how that informs then certain nuanced terms that Paul will use in the New Testament. And we want to go back to that. It's not saying that Christians had it wrong, like as if they had like a wrong faith or wrong theology. They would, when Paul says, if you believe that Christ was crucified, buried, rose again, things like Nicene Creed, Apostolic Creed, Athanasian, like these are just the bare foundational fundamentals that everyone agrees with, whether Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Protestant. But the moment then you go into the finer, like, well, what makes a Protestant relative to a Roman Catholic, and then the Eastern Orthodox? Oh, political stuff. The sinful hearts of human beings start to emerge, right? East and West bifurcations, and how ironic now, right? And so Heiser's like, no, he's introducing to the church, sift through all that noise, and then you hence naked Bible. You make it naked, where Paul would not have had any idea of a Roman Catholic Eastern Orthodox division, or like a Martin Luther 95 Thesis, because why would that matter for a biblical text, like in with respect to Paul's writing and so on. So okay, that's my opening ramble of stuff. That wasn't planned. It was just me just saying things that are coming straight to my mind. So feel free to share your thoughts. Take as much time as you require. I've taken 30 minutes, so maybe just half of that each if you want. But do that, and then we'll start the video.
Drew, you want to go first?
Oh yeah, sure. I think it'd just be good to start off just on as positive of a mindset as we can. Like, at least for me personally, like Heiser's work has been really, really helpful in just showing like the majesty and like the beauty of the interconnected story that is God's word. And I think it'd be really a great harm to the church just to like dismiss Heiser's teachings. So like, because of that, like our purpose is not to like defend like Heiser because he's our top guy. Like our purpose is to really defend the church by affirming like, hey, Heiser's teachings are really, really helpful for understanding the interconnected meta-narrative of the Bible. I think it's been really helpful for me. I'm sure it's been really helpful for everyone else. So we're defending the church by proxy of defending Heiser, as someone said.
I want to use up like maybe like 5-ish minutes. About 5 minutes. I want to say this. Heiser was one of the reasons I didn't become a UFO cultist. Also, shout out to Chris White for making the UFO debunk documentary, Ancient Aliens debunk documentary. And I just want to say that honestly, it isn't really just Heiser the person's more or less the stuff that he revealed, not stuff he revealed as like he's a prophet, but just mostly just the interpretation itself also, and just separate Heiser the man and just the interpretation, because we don't, again, like you can just go look into like what's the word, just the data itself, or just like the biblical references and and the textual variances, such as in the LXX with Deuteronomy 32, and then you have for the sons of God in Genesis 6, and then you have connected with Job 38. And honestly, it isn't really just going for, just defending the guy Heiser. It's just like just defending an interpretation. And that's all I really just want to say at the moment.
Just a quick funny story. How I actually first came across Heiser, okay, was my opa. After he passed, I was I was going through his library, his book library. He's a Christian. He never believed in wacky stuff, but he had wacky stuff. And for some reason, if I meet him one day again, I'll always ask him, how the heck did you get this book? I mean, we're coming from bloody India, for goodness sake. What the heck is this book? Or how did you get this book when we were living in India before we came to Australia? He had Zecharia Sitchin's books. Somehow. And I was reading those books going, whoa. So here's a guy writing in the 70s where he's arguing for the whole junk DNA. So that, now we know it's functional, by the way. It's no longer junk. There's a reason for it. But at the time, scientists were like, we don't know this is why we're calling it junk. It's a mystery. Zecharia Sitchin, as a grifter that he was, used this to go, the Genesis 6 situation. You see Nibiru with these aliens, right? These Nephilim, which is a word that means those in the rocket ships who came down. This is his interpretation of the terms. They interbred with the monkeys, and therefore the hybrid is the human. And therefore, the junk DNA is the variant alien DNA sort of lurking in our system and has no function anymore. So I was just like, the guy's claiming to be a cuneiform scholar. I had no idea about any of this stuff. I'm like, is this true? Is this, So what I did was I typed in Google, is Sitchin wrong? Guess what the search came up with? SitchinIsWrong.com. And I clicked on that going, whoa. And sure enough, it's Heiser on there. And what? So SitchinIsWrong.com. I want to share what Heiser says. So I'll quickly just share my screen. Mm-hmm. I want to share what Heiser says in the opening here, which really communicates the type of person that he was. He goes, the short answer is that I'm a scholar of biblical and ancient Near Eastern languages, cultures, and religions. Why do I bother with this stuff? Because I don't like ancient texts manipulated to promote false claims. Now this is the bit that really caught me, which made me an instant fan. If I were a lawyer, I'd feel professionally obligated to tell you if someone was giving you bad legal advice. If I was a medical doctor, I'd owe you the truth if I knew the medicine you were taking was bogus or could kill you. If I was an accountant, I'd let you know if a neighbor's tax advice could put you in jail. I'm none of those things, but take the analogy to heart. I'm trying to provide the same service in my areas of expertise. I can tell you and show you that what Zecharia Sitchin has written about Nibiru and all these, has absolutely no basis in the reality of the ancient world. I don't doubt that Sitchin is a nice guy. He's just wrong. Nothing personal. So, just this attitude alone got me hooked. And he's a Bible. He believes in the Bible. Like, whoa. I mean, don't forget, I'm coming from an atheist perspective, right? And those atheist leanings, like a Christopher Hitchens sort of attitude. Why would this guy who clearly speaks with a very good critical eye be a believer? You see, there's that. So if he can write like that, surely, is there a book that he's published? He didn't publish a book. This was in 2013. 2015 Unseen Realm emerges, and I couldn't wait to read it. And sure enough, when I was reading it, that same sass that he had, but to showcase Jesus as the destroyer of the gods, as to quote Heiser, as he would put it, just made me go, man, again, this is not unique to him. This is just, finally, someone has done the legwork, 10 years in the making. Okay, 2004 was his PhD, 2015 was the release of Unseen Realm. That 10 years in the making of pulling in all the scholarship, where there's actual scholarship in defense of the gospel, in the Orthodox Trinitarian, that would agree 100% with the creeds of the early church. That is Unseen Realm. in other words, an amalgamation of let's take even the higher critical approaches to the Bible that people presume attacks the Bible, and you're still ending out with a Nicene affirming faith. You see, that's Heiser's unseen realm in a nutshell. Anyway, anyone else would like to share before we start?
I have no clue about history.
You're quoting the Hadith over there, my man. Like, put Islam aside and... no, I'm kidding.
I'm not quoting Islam. Let's just start the video.
All right, okay.
Anything you wanted to say, Carrie?
Well, I did want to say something about what you said, like from...
Yeah, Carrie, just quickly, Carrie, just jump in. Yeah. I'm like an Australian here, so if you want to say, don't be polite, just be like, and then...
Hey, but you were saying how... Well, one thing that struck me with what you were saying was how one of the things Dr. Heiser really promoted was, even though he was teaching this stuff, he also said to not let this be like the barrier to fellowship in the body of Christ. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really, really an essential point. And that's missed by a lot of the people who are trying to be critics and trying to say that he was saying something special, that he was trying to elevate part of the body of Christ over another part of the body of Christ. He was trying to be an educator. That's what he was at heart. Mm-hmm. And for me, I came from an LDS background. I was raised LDS. And when I came across Dr. Heiser, my husband had been listening to Coast overnight because he had a night job. And he said, you need to listen to this guy, because my husband wasn't raised LDS. He knew the struggles I was having, trying to figure out especially what the Trinity was. And my husband said, you need to listen to this stuff. And I'm like, well, I'm not against UFO stuff and listening to Coast, but I wasn't a listener at that time. But eventually he found like the 8-hour videos on the ancient Near Eastern context, that the really old ones that Dr. Heiser had. And I said, well, I can watch an 8-hour lecture. I'm not going to listen to something else. But so I listened to those. I don't know how many times over the course of, 3 to 5 months. And at first I was like, well, I don't know if I can trust this guy. He doesn't sound like a kooky guy, but I don't know what he's talking about, because I came from this context that was really, really suspicious of anything that we could know about the historical context of the Bible. For like early church history, from my perspective, I was still hanging on to these ideas that we couldn't know anything about it. And so Dr. Heiser coming along and saying, yeah, here's the context and here's how we can know about Jesus as God, as part of the Trinity. That was just mind-blowing to me, because I had spent like a decade trying to find out how Christians could defend the Trinity and coming up only with bad arguments for the Trinity, really bad arguments that I thought anyway, that I could defeat using scripture alone myself, just the Bible. Not that I was even trying to do that. I wanted to understand the Trinity, but nobody was offering me a way to do that made any sense in the Bible I was reading. So by the time that I found Dr. Heiser's work, I had started to decouple from the LDS history and the LDS theology, but I didn't know what to do with things like the Trinity. So when people go and attack Dr. Heiser for his views teaching the Trinity, it kind of blows my mind, because his work was why I believe in the Trinity now. And so, anytime people bring up, oh, this leads to LDS theology, it's just laughable to me. It's part of what drew me out of it. Anyway.
Yes, I will second that like a million times, just because everything that Heiser has stolen from the Trinity by his interpretation of Genesis 1:26, which we can get into later, he's repaid 77-fold by his defense of two powers in heaven doctrine. Because he traces it all throughout, the angel of the Lord, the commander of the Lord's army, and Joshua, even to Second Temple texts, showing that these Second Temple Jews believed in a Godhead, basically. So yeah, everything that he's taken away from the Trinity, he's repaid so many times. So yeah.
And you know what's funny? There's been books on the two powers 5 years after Unseen Realm, by at least two different authors. One called Two Gods in Heaven, but he's not being I think it's bitheistic or ditheistic, like two distinct, like you have tritheism, which is three distinct.
Ditheism.
Or ditheism. So he's not arguing for that. It's a provocative title. So there's Two Powers in Heaven by an Andre, like he's some sort of like Russian scholar, and one called Two Gods or something like that. Very recent works. They don't cite Heiser. They cite the people that Heiser has cited, further building up on their work.
Wait, no, beg your pardon. Sorry to interrupt. No, binitarianism, not ditheism. Ditheism would be more along the lines of Manichaeanism. So yeah, binitarianism.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, the title ultimately was going for a binitarian argument. Yes. So it's the bi and the di that was confusing. Yeah. So in other words, Orthodox Jewish understandings of a Godhead. What I'm saying is there are scholars literally a year ago, 2 years ago, that have published academic. I mean, we're talking about prestigious publishers in the academic field. I have their works in the Google Drive if anyone wants to read them. I've keyword searched Heiser. No, doesn't appear. I've keyword searched other people Heiser cited. Oh, they appear, by the truckload and furthering their argument. So it makes you go, how interesting. Those who in YouTube land, which Heiser would call Middle Earth, where, or like the TikTok culture where just senseless information is just, vomited out. And we see this all the time, like Undevelopment and Cloud. We see this all the time with the Myth Vision podcast and all these guys who argue for nonsense. Like Asherah is Yahweh's, female wife, and the whole two powers thing is not what was believed. And no, in the actual critical scholarship, they're saying exactly what Heiser is saying. And so then I'm thinking, well, what does that then? What can we conclude with this? Was Heiser deliberately looking for points to defend a certain bias that he had? Because that's possible. If he claims to be a dot connector, surely, I mean, I've seen this even on Reddit, where people wonder, okay, if he's dot connecting, is he dot connecting selectively? No. In other words, he's produced these works, and the actual peer review not of only his works, but also of other works that, let's see if they also make the same arguments. And sure enough, all of it is, they're just regurgitating the same stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what else to say. I mean, this helps the faith. This helps traditional Christian creedal formulations of why we believe Jesus is begotten, not made. These classic designations, in the Orthodox creedal sense, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Undevelopment, you've turned your camera on. You want to say something?
Because I don't know. I haven't seen ahead of time what we're about to watch. And I'm not familiar by name with the people. I'm really just going to throw out a sort of a prediction on the psychology here, because I've seen this kind of stuff before where it's sort of that, at some point in Heiser's life, he was, I've never seen this before. And then he shows it to a friend and they said, well, I've never seen this before. And he was thinking, well, why? Why haven't people seen this before? And I was wondering the same thing when I heard about it from him. Why haven't people seen this before? Why haven't I seen this before? Why doesn't anybody talk about this? And so I'm thinking it's along that line of people in the back of their mind are just hoping that the atheist isn't right. And if somebody brings something to them that they're not familiar with, they're scared of it all falling apart, like everything that they believe. And so without even looking into what he's actually saying, they're already trying to dismiss it. And I think that that's probably what we're going to see here. Maybe not.
Which, in that clip I played at the intro where you saw Steven Anderson holding up a book and then he just throws it, saying it's trash. If you pause and read the title of that book, it's a book published by Zondervan, a introduction to the language of Ugaritic, by an evangelical scholar who teaches Ugaritic. And it's just interesting that he throws that book, and I'm aware of that book because I have that book and the video course on my Google Drive. And it's just funny how he just, there you go. Like, but Steven Anderson would be your, what would you call him? I mean, he's at King James only.
IFB fundamentalist.
Yeah.
Stage.
Why should I take him seriously? He's a guy that literally says things like, men should not piss. I'm being a bit crude, but this is his words. Men should not urinate on walls, or stand up urinating, or something like that. Why? Because the King James translation of a certain verse, and I think it's in Samuel somewhere, about those who pisseth against the wall. Apparently, and there's some sort of judgment scene happens, and so then here's a guy who takes that as a teaching tool and goes, therefore men should not stand in urinals, and it's crazy. It's just bonkers stuff, right? Like, there's clips of him standing on a podium and taking a screw and a bolt and smashing them together while he's standing on a podium talking down on the congregation. So these people are crazy, okay? Like, psychologically, putting aside theology and all that stuff. Let Christ somehow work with these people. But these people do not dictate to me, the truth of Heiser's arguments, the truth or the false of his arguments. All right, let's start with the video. So, I apologize to you, Carrie, for welcome to a community of YouTube Christians that I've seen a very weird and interesting part of Middle Earth YouTube land, and so anyway, I tried to sugarcoat as much as I could.
It is what it is.
Yeah. Okay, so let's begin. I put this at 1.5x speed. If it's a bit too fast, let me know and I'll slow down.
We'll be talking with Dr. Wave Nunnally. He has a MA in Hebrew language from Jerusalem University College, a master's in Old Testament from Reformed Theological Seminary, a master's of philosophy and PhD doctorate in Hebraic Cognate Studies, Jewish backgrounds of the Bible from Hebrew Union College. His dissertation was on the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is very salient to today's topic. Dr. Nunnally is the author of numerous articles and books with a focus on the Jewish backgrounds of the New Testament, and especially the Gospels and Acts. He currently serves as professor of early Judaism and Christian origins at Evangel University.
At the beginning of the prophecy of Malachi, God is rebuking the people, and he says, "V'im aronim ani," and if I am a lords, and it's plural. The reality is that within the Hebrew language, there's a very interesting phenomenon that the grammarians call a plural of majesty, and they will explain in Hebrew grammars that oftentimes God will be spoken of in the plural simply to acknowledge his higher status than anyone who's speaking to or standing in his presence. So the word Elohim, it's much the same thing. It is a plural of majesty. And it can be rather than a suggestion that there is a plurality of gods. So you have this in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, Elohim,
hey, Rob, can you stop
plural, created bara.
I actually have a question, Rob. When you were watching the earlier part that we haven't watched, and it's fine, but it seems to me like Dorian, one of her points is that she was trying to say that Dr. Heiser was saying that the word Elohim in Genesis 1:26 by itself was including the angels. Did you get that sense when you were hearing her talk about it? like it's really hard for me to try and understand if she was presenting Heiser's argument accurately, as in the passage is talking about God and the angels, or whether she's mistaking the fact or this idea that Elohim, the word, actually includes the idea of angels.
Honestly, I'll probably have to play. You're talking about the intro segment part, right?
Well, there's the intro, and she says several other things later that kind of indicate to me that she's trying to say that the word Elohim by itself includes the plurality of God plus the angels.
Yeah. So wait, just to clarify, Heiser will argue, and this is just for everyone to know what Heiser says, just to put that on the table, and then because I'm a little bit confused with your question. Heiser will say the term has cognates into obviously Semitic languages. Very loose analogy would be something like when we say, "Oh, I saw a ghost," or maybe we can say the word spirit, but I think ghost is better in this sense. Immediately, psychologically, your mind goes ghost, something that is not of this world. It's a place of residence term, as Heiser would call it. So in other words, if I said right now, live on YouTube, I'm a ghost, duh, no, I'm not, I'm physical, cut me and I'll bleed, that sort of thing, right? That it doesn't fit the etymology of the term that psychologically your mind immediately races to what we define as ghosts. So Elohim is basically like that. It's a place of residence term for, like the Witch of Endor, I see an Elohim rising out of the ground, right? And it's Samuel. Another way of writing Elohim is Elim, which is used for the Shadim, the demons, Deuteronomy 32:17. Angels, so the Greek angelos, Psalm 82, Psalm 8, Psalm 89, basically the court, they are Elohim. Then, interestingly enough, you have even idols, like physical, with the with have the mouths open, and hence what they call the opening of the mouth ritual, where the entity enters into this idol, which is obviously lifeless. Until the entity enters in, then it's like a genie in a bottle sort of thing, right? So these lifeless idols that are made out of clay are also called Elohim. But it's not that the idol itself ontologically is an Elohim. It's the entity that you can now do your bidding with. Yahweh is called an Elohim. But as Heiser would say, no, so that, you have Elohim, but no Elohim is that particular Elohim. That's why you have, like in Isaiah, which other Elohim is beside me? There's no other God beside me, right? So
sorry to disturb.
Yeah. No, go for it.
It's a concretized abstract plural that basically denotes common supernatural phenomena. Human souls, disembodied human souls can be Elohim. Gods of varying degrees of roles and power can be Elohim. And also the term Elohim is applied to Yahweh, who himself is ultimate reality. And of course, as you mentioned, there is no Elohim like Yahweh.
Yes, on page 30 of Unseen Realm, he lists the different beings that are referred to as Elohim. He lists Yahweh, the God of Israel, obviously. The members of Yahweh's council, lists Psalm 82, 1 and 6. As there are a bunch of other passages that do that too. Gods and goddesses of other nations, he lists Judges 11:24 and 1 Kings 11:33. Demons, the Hebrew is Shadim. So as Rob said, it derives from Elim, Deuteronomy 32:17. The deceased Samuel in 1 Samuel 28:13, and angels or the angel of Yahweh, which again is in several texts, but he gives Genesis 35:7 when it's referred to as Elohim.
So here's what I'm thinking. So a lot of people want to take the plural of Elohim here, or that the fact that Elohim can be plural, and insert it and say that when it's used in Genesis 1, the plurality of the word Elohim is necessary to the text, right? Like, so this is how you get the Trinity in the word Elohim. It's because Elohim is a plural term, or it can be a plural term. And so people want to attach the Trinity concept to this word itself. So if Doreen heard Dr. Heiser say, which he doesn't say this, but if she heard that he said that the word Elohim necessitates not the Trinity, but God plus the angels itself, then I could see that really knocking her world. But that's a complete mischaracterization of or mishearing of what Dr. Heiser said. So I'm wondering if that's part of what's going on here.
I think part of so at the start of the stream, when I said I'm angry and disappointed, definitely again, I hope I'm wrong. Like, I genuinely hope I'm wrong, but it feels like she hasn't actually read his works. Maybe a page or two here and there. Has she? I'm being blunt, and people are kind of like surprised to see me be animated like this. Has she even followed through with the footnotes? But the Unseen Realm is just a truck. In fact,
thing is that
there's more footnotes in the book than the overall thesis of the book.
Right. She didn't understand this new revelation of what Dr. Heiser was teaching until she interviewed him for his Demons book. And by then, he had given her a copy of the Demons book. And previous to that, he had given her all of his other work. So the fact that when she's interviewing him is the first time she's come to realize what he's really teaching, even though she's mishearing it or mischaracterizing it, one or the other, I don't see how we can understand that she has read the work. But regardless, what I think is going on is this kind of cross streams of trying to fit more into the word Elohim than is there. And so when they're talking about the plural of majesty, that doesn't even say anything about what Dr. Heiser's talking about, since he's really focused on the verb, and the plural of majesty is the noun and not the verb.
Isn't also plural majesty also used by Unitarians to like just get away from the verse being the interpretation of a Trinity from the Old Testament and Genesis 1 anyway, which is
it is used in LDS theology that way.
No, I was just going to say, classically, scholars back in like mid 20th century, the sort of pushback against the Wellhausen high criticism of the Old Testament. So one of I know David Falk is watching. God bless you. It's nice to see you here. But people like Falk and a few others will say that Gleason Archer, the good old Gleason Archer, is outdated now. So classically, people like Gleason Archer, who would be he was like the guy who was the foremost biblical defender of its inerrancy and so on, right? He would say, I could bring up the clips, but he would say that the plural majesty doesn't exist until a certain time period, or the concept of a plural of majesty to mean the one dude with a court setting. So Archer would argue that Genesis 1:26, when it says "let us make," is not a plural majesty, but rather is, since it doesn't exist, say in the ancient Near East, and especially in the author's mind of Genesis 1, ergo, how do you explain the us language if there's no such thing as plural majesty? The concept. Oh, Trinity. You see, that's how he would argue that. Now, obviously, a lot has transpired since Archer. And now we've discovered that, no, there is plural majesty concepts in the ancient Near East. Archer's wrong. Now, notice this. Heiser is aware of that because don't forget, Archer passed away in 2004. His last major work was actually like 2001, and he was very old. It was more to do with creation and evolution. He actually co-authored a book on Genesis with Hugh Ross. But before that, his last major work, A Survey in the Old Testament, was like 94, like 3rd edition or something. A seminary sort of book that was used. There's a lot of good that Archer did. There's a lot of arguments that he had, sophisticated enough, and his writing style was very polemical, but it's just wrong now. It's outdated. Heiser, don't forget, published his dissertation. If you think about it, it's an interesting connection. If Archer passed away in 2004, Heiser earned his PhD in 2004. And ever since, Heiser has been tracking with, SPL meetings and all the high critical approaches to the Bible that have that if Archer was still alive today, he would just be heartbroken to see some of how the guild has sort of diverted into some really just crazy just nonsense. And not all, just some big names have just gone down the gutter, literally. But Heiser has cited Archer a few times on the Naked Bible podcast, for example. He's even cited a guy named Robert Dick Wilson, who was way back. We're talking like late 1800s, early 1900s, where Heiser would say just brief throwaway comments like, I'm a real big fan of his because of just his approach, and my ear catches those things, and I'm like, oh, interesting. So Heiser is actually genuinely tracking with the Wellhausen criticism, the pushback against it, and this sort of tennis match between the two extremes, right up until 21st century scholarship. And all of that is packaged in Unseen Realm moving forward. And then Heiser will then say, you can actually have a both-and situation. It is a plural majesty, but that doesn't mean it's not a trinity. You can have a Trinitarian theology despite it being a divine council court discussion. Because when you then look at Psalm 82, the Elohim that's standing in El's council, judging on the Elohim, El would be the Father, the Elohim at the start of the verse would be the Son, and the Elohim at the end of the verse, which is in a genuine plural, is the gods. That Jesus then says in John 10 that he's the one that judges among them, right? He's the Son of God that God has consecrated and then sent into the world to then do what he needs to do. The Jews understand exactly what he's saying, and a lot of New Testament scholars who, unfortunately, are not sensitive to the Second Temple Qumran arguments for Psalm 82 and why Jesus quotes Psalm 82, which then dovetails back to, if you want, all the way back to Deuteronomy 32, and then further back to Genesis 1, putting aside all the documentary hypothesis stuff like priestly texts and Yahwistic texts. Okay, just putting all that aside, what does the text in its final form showcase? And theologically, sorry, I'm hitting the mic. Theologically, the one who, as the church fathers would argue, like Clement of Alexandria will say, if it says we're made in the image of God, well, you have a hierarchy. We're made in the image of the Logos, who in turn is the image of God, Colossians 1:15. That hierarchy leads to the natural logical progression of why the incarnation happened the way it did. Why did God choose humans? Because there is a genuine hierarchy back to the fact that he sees us as special, despite us being lower than the Elohim. And so ergo, Colossians 2 is all about theosis. And then I will actually showcase works, okay, but when we get to the Jordan Cooper bit, I'll actually showcase Lutherans themselves arguing for full-blown deification And they themselves will argue this doesn't mean we become the Trinity. And I'll even showcase Heiser in his own works in the footnotes as well. So you can see it for yourself. Clearly these people haven't read it. Where Heiser himself says, I'm not a Mormon. Or I'm not arguing that we become the Trinity. He actually in a whole footnote says, the evangelical tradition before him, we're talking in the 90s, 80s and 90s, he's citing works in the 80s and 90s, arguing for or having a engagement with the fact that the Eastern Orthodox traditions on theosis, it's like two ships passing in the middle of the night, or it's like as if there's been a genuine chasm where there's, because of obviously differences in cultures, which European, English-speaking European churchman would have a correspondence with the Greek-speaking, Eastern Orthodox Christian. Obviously, if the Eastern Orthodox Church itself, no offense to them, but puts a genuine division between men and women within the church, like they actually seat them in different spots. What more than culturally, right? So then, I kid you not, there's been an interdialogue now, an integration of well, what is your perspective on theosis? Oh, now we understand, because don't forget, you speak Greek and we're English, and it's the Greek that technically is why you're getting this particular theology, because it's the Greek in the text that then drives theosis glory language. And anyway, I'm sort of jumping the gun a bit, but coming back to your question, Carrie, yeah, I think if she's only read a page here and there, that's what confuses me. She's had physical interactions with the Heiser family. It just blows my mind. I don't understand. How much did she invest? What sort of questions behind closed doors did she ask Heiser? Did she ask any specific questions? Was it just a thank you? Okay, yeah, I'll check these out. I've got things to do now. Was it that type of interaction? We can only guess, right? And maybe this is why it's hurt. In fact, I won't go there, but yeah. So, we have another guest coming on. There you go.
Also, for those who are interested, the footnote about where Heiser clarifies what he means by theosis, i.e., it is not becoming the Trinity. That's on page 319 in Unseen Realm. I just looked it up. So. Oh
yeah, I'll share my screen so everyone can see it. Let me just bring up the.
Yeah, he's very, very nuanced in what he means and what he doesn't mean when he talks about theosis. And really, he doesn't. We talked about this before the stream started, but when Heiser talks about theosis, he really talks about it more in terms of like a return to the original Edenic vision of basically humans being in God's family. He doesn't really go into the metaphysical discussions of like energy, essence, energy. He doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't say anything that would divide Protestants and Eastern Orthodox Christians. I mean, he gives a very surface overview of theosis, basically. He doesn't get anything that would divide Christians.
So let's read this. This is right at the end, okay? This is in the context of, it's in chapter 36, Lower than the Elohim, which is leading to,
May I read it? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, okay. Robert, should we continue on with like the video itself with like the guy before, like, because I think we're like.
Yeah. I'll just quickly show this because it's this particular footnote. So, joining God's divine family is inextricably linked to New Testament concept.
The concept of becoming like Jesus, becoming divine. Sorry to disturb you, Rob. The academic term describing this point of biblical theology is theosis. As one evangelical theologian laments, the idea of divinization of redeemed human nature somehow participating in the very life of God is found to be a surprising extent throughout Christian history. Although it is practically unknown to the majority of Christians and even many theologians in the West. The concept
in the West. So we'll just leave it at that. Just because that's now when you click on this footnote, This is the particular guy he's citing, Becoming Like God, an Evangelical Doctrine of Theosis, Journal of the you can't get any more conservative and fundamental than this particular journal, all right? Notice the date of the journal, 97. In fact, ironically, the year I came to Australia. And then Heiser, okay, now read this bit from Heiser.
Theosis is a significant element of Christian Orthodox theology. Though Catholicism and all the major reformers embrace some form of the idea, naturally theological articulations will differ. See John McLean.
Right. So then when we skip down, so these are all the further journal articles that he's citing. Notice this, Reformed Theological Review. What is this? Union with Christ in the thought of John Calvin? Theosis and so on?
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about. Like Heiser's doctrine of theosis, or whenever he talks about theosis, he doesn't get into any of the nuances that would divide like Protestants, Catholics, and Eastern Orthodox. He's just giving a very broad overview of it, and for the specific purpose of connecting, like this is what God's original plan was. His original plan was to have like the divine family and the human family like be together in an Edenic-esque environment.
Right. And so now, in conclusion, read this bit, my own views.
Okay. My own views on theosis are in line with Rakastro. I don't know how to say my name, sorry.
Yeah, the guy he's cited at the start. Yep.
We do not become God or Jesus as though joining the Trinity. We do not become deities on ontic par with Yahweh, akin to Mormon thought. Rather, we are made like him, receiving a glorified body of, as Paul puts it, celestial flesh, in 1 Corinthians 15, 42 to 54. That's it.
Yeah, so basically on the nature of this body, see, Lit was a massive critical scholar on all this. But nevertheless, Litva is saying, even to those who are agnostic and atheists, because he writes for that crowd, he's like, look, this form of, deification theosis is fascinating. It doesn't mean the Mormons got it right. So Heiser's citing even a critical scholar like Litwa, David M. Litwa. This doesn't lead to the truth of things like Mormonism and so on. So yeah, there you go. Like that. Well, welcome to Heiser's dot connecting. Like there's nothing more than this.
If I'm not mistaken, Mormonism would be more akin to apotheosis rather than theosis.
And Litwa has written works. Literally, there's one work called Apotheosis.
Yeah. Where
he wants to showcase the Greco-Roman forms of apotheosis, and then find like his whole body of work is, I kid you not, the guy just seems to be fascinated with the topic. Like he's written like 3 or 4 different books on the whole topic. So there's one particular book, which is this one, We're Being Transformed. When you're looking at it through the Christian engagement against the idea of apotheosis, like for example the Caesars having an apotheosis, right? Let's continue with the video, but I just want to clarify what the difference is between theosis and deification and this apotheosis. When I engage with Muslims, believe it or not, I'm going to bring in Islam here as for the sake of the evangelizing reality that we are actually in. I would love to see how Dorian would really engage this. I'm being a little bit, blunt there. Muslims don't seem to realize that despite their traditions saying that they will see Allah's face, simultaneously their tradition will say Allah has a hijab, a veil that protects his glory from incinerating the entire creation. So then the question is, like what Moses said right at the beginning, can I see a glory? No, you can't see me and live. John 1:18, no one has seen God. Because just practically everyone, if you have your mind in this sort of theological argumentation, in the Semitic theological argumentation, everyone knew of the one true God as that can't be seen. Jesus in John's Gospel many times, no one has seen the Father. So not even the angels have seen the Father then? Isaiah 6, I saw the Lord seated on this throne, right? How interesting that then when the New Testament enlarges the fact that no, whoever saw God saw, as John 1:18 again continues to say, so no one has seen God. It's the unique God, the monogamous theos, that is at the Father's side that was revealed to everyone. So when God was walking in the garden, when Jacob was wrestling, when God was eating that non-kosher meal with Abraham, on all the way through to supposedly even in Islam, Muhammad going to the seventh heaven and seeing Allah. The Christian argument is Muhammad saw Jesus, or Muhammad saw the second power, the second person of the Trinity. Then the gospel message is theosis is that to be conformed to his image, Romans 8, means that if only the Son can see the Father, therefore, as Hebrews, in that famous verse in Hebrews, we pass through the veil, that is his flesh. He becomes now the means by which we can then see the Father's face in glory without being destroyed. And what an amazing privilege would that be, because isn't that one of the promises Jesus gives in Revelation 2 and 3? Remember, those who overcome, I will write the mysterious name of my Father on their foreheads. It's like, wow, the name that was never known since the dawn of time, because Yahweh is a nonsense term. It doesn't really mean anything, right? You can't put a name to a being that transcends all of it. That's the beauty of the promise. It's like we can actually behold the Father finally through Jesus in glory. That is wildly better, different but better than any apotheosis hope that the Caesars thought they could have, right? Especially if you're transcending all of it, right? With through Christ. Hence John 17, so that they may be one in us. We will make our home in them, right? Revelation 21, God will make his tent among humans. The descent of the New Jerusalem, and God will be all in all. That's the gospel message. It doesn't mean we become the Trinity. It's all about how is God going to bring about a relationship where there's that the philosophical issues and the ontological issues can all just be vanished. Jesus is the mediator that answers all of that. So, all right, let's continue with the video.
And it's singular. So you have a grammatical inconsistency going on there, where the subject of the verb is plural, but the verb itself is singular. That's telling you right there that the author of Genesis does not have in mind.
Oh, we have just quickly, we have Drina herself. God bless you, Drina. It's good to see you here. It's a privilege to see you comment on the channel, and your family is in my prayers. Mike is sorely missed, and just send my blessings and wishes, especially to Calvin as well.
And a plurality of deities, but rather an elevated attitude toward the one deity who is doing the bara'ing, the creating out of nothing. The Genesis 1:26 is hugely problematic in light of what's going on earlier in the passage, where you have, and I recognize the verb in 1:26 is plural. Not say, let us make, or we will make.
Okay.
But that's downstream from.
You want to say something, Carrie?
Yeah, see, I think.
Wait, was that you, or was that someone in the video?
It was probably somebody in the video, but I do want to say,
okay.
I think this is really exactly, he's responding to what I think Dorian got that misperception of the idea that Elohim really is, that Dr. Heiser was trying to say that Elohim means more than it does. And I think that's, in a way, he's almost making our point for us in some sense, but, He doesn't actually engage with the verb of the passage, so that it's not helpful to the discussion, honestly.
Hey, Rob.
Yep.
So, I mean, you know Heiser's work better than I do, right? But now my impression of what what he talked about on this subject was that Elohim is a plural noun, right? Clearly, when it's paired with a singular verb, that's an indication that it's talking about God. When it's paired with a plural verb, then that's when it could be describing a whole bunch of other things. Is that, am I off on that, or?
No,
is that,
no.
yeah.
In fact, we have here my good friend here, David, who just gave a side comment. I'm just nerding out with, I mean, it's not, I mean, he's just commenting on what's his name again? Wave was saying. The bara does not necessarily mean out of nothing, which is, John Walton has said that, Heiser said that.
Yeah.
He can clarify that for you as well, in the comments. In fact, David, if you feel like it, feel free to join the stream. But yeah, you're not. Based on, say, how Mike say, I mean, he, for the sake of keeping it simple, he would use Psalm 82:1 with that argument. You know, the first Elohim there is capital G singular because you can't have a plural standing singular. Then passing judgment plural with respect to the Elohim plural, right? So,
yeah, I think where the misunderstanding really lies is that Heiser does not think that, Heiser only inserts the divine counsel into Genesis 1 in verse 26, not anywhere else in the passage.
Yep.
Yeah, and a quick side note on that. This is from Job 38, but starting with verse 4, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. And then it goes on. Then in verse 7, it says, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Right. So the indication there is that the host of heaven observed the creation.
Yes.
Or at least some point it observed the creation. Right. Which I think in the video they go on to basically say is nonsense, or say it's, well, whatever. So.
That sounds like Eru Iluvatar and the Ainur, not to just divert from the topic.
Yeah, Heiser's argument is that the divine council or the angels, you can substitute any concept you want, but or any word you want for that concept. His argument is that the angels or the Elohim or the divine council were present at creation, not participating, but present at creation, and he based that off of Job 38:7. And in verse 26, when God says, "Let us make man in our image," he's talking to the divine council as if I was a host of a party and I said, "Let us go get a pizza." I'm going to be the one getting a pizza, but it's the but I'm still talking like corporately, i.e. God is the one making man, but the divine council shares man, I guess. So yeah.
Yep. I don't know if there's anything else that you guys wanted to clarify on, but I'll continue.
Yeah, we could probably move on. We've been on Genesis 1 for a while.
Yeah.
Bara Elohim, and the bara is very clearly singular. It's also problematic with respect to the entirety of the Pentateuch, where toward the end you have in another famous Heiserian passage, Deuteronomy 32, that he understands and is using a variant from the Dead Sea Scrolls to read sons of El instead of sons of Yisrael, sons of Israel. So there in Deuteronomy 32, just a little bit beyond the passage that is his favorite there, verses 8 and 9, when you get to Genesis chapter 32, verses 37 and 39, said twice, "There is no God beside me." This is what Yahweh is saying. So you have bracketed passages on either side of 126. You've got, up in chapter 1, verse 1, the one God created, singular verb. Then at the end of the Pentateuch, you have Moses sounds there almost like Isaiah, when Isaiah, besides me, there is no other, where you have God in 32, 37 and 39 saying there is no God beside me. You can bring me back to some of the other ones, but if I could, let me pause and just reflect on the...
Okay, so this bit just made me laugh. Oh man, he was so close. So first and foremost, he didn't engage the differences between the Masoretic reading, the Septuagint reading, and the Dead Sea Scroll reading with respect to the overall Canaanite, ancient Near Eastern depictions of the 70 sons of El, right? Let me just, for the sake of time, because I can bring it up, but I won't, I'll just summarize it. It's on my Google Drive. I have a 2015 dissertation, I kid you not, about the Septuagint specifically. Why 70, the so-called 70 scribes, okay, of the Septuagint, with respect to Deuteronomy 32:8, has nothing to do with Heiser's work. In fact, the work only briefly appeals to one of Heiser's articles, a BSAC article, Bibliotheca article from 2001, about Deuteronomy 32:8 with respect to the possibility that the Sons of God reading should be the reading. This work is basically arguing. Actually, while I'm speaking, I'll just bring up the title of the work, because I know people will be like, "What are you talking about, Rob?" This work is basically saying that you have a long tradition where the Sanhedrin, number 70, the Table of Nations, number 70, Jesus sends out 70 in Luke 10. You have this ancient Near Eastern tradition of 70 sons of El. You have 70 children of Israelites going into Egypt. 70, suddenly 70 becomes this very peculiar round figure term, which can also be what's called a sexagesimal number, a base 60 number. And there's also the possibility that the Masoretic scribe may have, I mean, the scholar who's writing the dissertation is actually defending the Masoretic scribe. He's basically saying it's a both and. So the Dead Sea Scroll reading Son of God versus Son of Israel are implying the same thing. That just as you have the disinheritance of the humans to the 70 nations and hence the 70 sons of El, so you have the 70 sons of Israel as imaging or mimicking in a micro sense that thing. And therefore the Sanhedrin become, ironically, because if Israel is to be a light to the nations and Israel is meant to be like the navel of the earth, God's, the apple of God's eye, Israel is meant to be the center of the universe, compared to, say, Babylon in the Babylonian world map is the center of the, like, in other words, this is all theological polemics at play, right? So the Sanhedrin then is like the 70 nations, is a courtroom that's meant to connotate the wholeness of the universe in that micro sense, right? What's the implications then with the high priest's trial with Jesus? Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, the creator God, standing in the 70 council courtroom. How interesting, right? Like there's all this added layers of like, where you see the ramifications and the implications of what all this means, right? So this guy who claims to be a PhD scholar in this stuff doesn't seem to realize that that scholars at large are asking the right questions and going, and especially this particular dissertation is going, the Masoretic scribe is doing something interesting by deliberately putting in. So in other words, in Hebrew there it's B'nai El, but if you were to just abbreviate it into B'nai Yisrael, you put because in the word Israel you have El already there. You just put the Israel part, and that expands it into a so God divided mankind according to the number of the sons of Israel. Ooh, wow. The sons of Israel. Because see, Israel is the focus. That doesn't deny the other sons of God stuff. This is just a Masoretic scribe dude just working with this. But before the Masoretic rendering, the Septuagint has angels.
And the
Dead Sea Scrolls has the sons of El.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the ancient Near East, and So here's this is just to show you the particular paper itself. This is the title. It's Moses and the 70 Elders, Mosaic Authority, Numbers 11, and the Legend of the Septuagint. It's a 2015 work. When you go to 32.8 in his dissertation, all I'll do is I'll read you what even the rabbinic, well, in this case the Targum here, but I'll even show you what the rabbinic people, Jews were saying. So this Targum says, when the Most High gave the world as an inheritance to nations which came forth from the sons of Noah, when he divided alphabets and tongues to the sons of men, he cast lots with the 70 angels, the princes of the nations, and established the borders of the peoples according to the number of the 70 souls of Israel which went down into Egypt. Notice this big paraphrase. And this is simultaneous to the Masoretic tradition. So I won't belabor the point. You guys get it. As you can see over here, just very quickly. So you shall write on the stones, this is again another Targum on Deuteronomy 27:8. So you shall write on the stones all the words of this law, a writing engraved and distinct, read in one language and translated into 70 languages. I won't go on and on, but notice over here, footnote 101, Mike Heiser appears, but notice it's a 2001 particular work, and all he's doing in this particular work, so the reason why I'm citing Heiser has nothing to do with Unseen Realm. He's basically saying, boosting his argument in his dissertation that, you have a Qumran text that actually defends this particular reading when you're tracking down on all these data points. So in other words, Heiser summarizes the textual issues and cites other reasons for connecting 32.8 with Genesis 10:11. That's all he's doing in that work. Nothing more. All right. I'm holding back from spending hours on because I know this is meant to be more like a lay audience sort of response. But this is the sort of thing you have to be aware of, for goodness sake. Yeah, this is the sort of thing you have to be familiar with, aware of. Anyway.
Hey, Rob, could you look at my DMs with you and go to 4Q37?
4Q37?
Yeah.
And
scroll all the way down. Deuteronomy 32.
I have it here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you do?
Yeah, no, that's what I brought up.
Oh, you did? My bad.
Yeah. No, I brought it up in the dissertation. Yeah. If anyone could see Hebrew, he already had it there in the footnote. Yeah, 4Q37 is the Qumran text of 32.8. All right, let's continue with.
Yeah, we could also just grant for the sake. I'm sure this will crop up later if they accuse Heiser of basing his doctrine off of a textual variant. It's we can completely grant that the Masoretic text reading is the best reading, but you still have Deuteronomy 29:25. It is because they abandoned the covenant of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and went and served other gods whom he had not allotted to them. And then also you have Deuteronomy 4:19-20, which I don't have to read. And then you have Paul's stuff about sacrificing to demons, associating it with Deuteronomy 32:17, the Shadim.
Mm-hmm.
Then you also have the princes in Daniel. So he's not basing his doctrine off of a particular reading of Deuteronomy 32. It's a theme that's all throughout Scripture, essentially. So I'm sure that'll crop up later. But I feel it'd be good to say at some point.
Yeah. So just to summarize, if I was to talk to, is his name Wave?
Yes.
I'm just wondering. Yeah, if I was to ask Wave, why the Septuagint? Like, why? Like, we know that everyone knows the word Septuagint. Do you even know what Septuagint means? Like the number, it's a way of saying 70.
70 translators.
Why? I mean, you have the tradition, 70 scribes. Why? The why question, dig deeper. And I have a feeling he wouldn't be able to answer it. So, all right.
The kind of the bigger sociological issue going on here, and that is when you have an expert and an author and someone who has come to be very highly thought of in evangelical circles. To me, it is almost unimaginable, it's at least inexplicable, that we have such a large number of people who call themselves evangelicals who are willing to go in the direction of polytheism, and to go in a direction that we have historically not gone in terms of Bible interpretation. It also concerns me, since we're talking sociology, that we have large pockets of evangelicals, and I travel a lot. I preach and teach all over the United States, but largely in the land of Israel, where I teach people the Bible on site. It really is interesting to me that we have such a large number of evangelicals who appear to be willing to jettison the idea of a completed 66 book canon that is to determine all matters of faith and practice. And I've seen.
Can I point
if you want me
something
to
out?
parse that.
Yep, go for it.
I think it should be kind of obvious what he just did there. He just pulled an us versus them argument. He's causing separation and division. He's claiming that anybody that agrees with him is part of the we. We're in this together, and they're falling away from it. So if you're, if you look at anything that Heiser says and you think it has any worth, then you're dividing yourself, is what he's trying to say. That's your fault that you're not believing what we believe. It's not fair to anybody at that point to make that division and to claim that and to start using language like we and them.
Now, this is coming from a faithful, conservative, evangelical scholar, specializes in ancient Egypt. I recommend you guys subscribe to his channel, David Falk. In fact, he's the one that he's my go-to now with anything Egypt and so on. Falk has no filter. In convenient times as this. So, in other words, he's just reacting bluntly. The vocabulary he was using, no offense to you, Wave, but you sound no different to Ken Ham and Ken Hovind. This is the same, words that that they would utilize. Were you there? 60, like this, when he uses terms like the 66 books of the canon, no one's denying that. But then when you then go in that trajectory, now suddenly you're, like you pointed out on development, this therefore the Roman Catholics have it wrong when they add these deuterocanonical texts. No, that's like an in-house discussion and a side issue. I would still not call them, I wouldn't go down the whole, they're not my Christian brothers or something like that, right? What about certain churches that actually, and ancient, by the way, that do hold to First Enoch as scripture? I don't, but Heiser himself will argue and showcase that there were patristic writers who held to Enoch, and there was a big debate. Do we include it? Do we not? I mean, this is just part of the general debate as to, the formulation of the canon. So then that makes me wonder, are you those type of Christians that are actually ignorant of church history when it comes to the formalization of the canon, where you presume that the 66 books is already there in the first century? When clearly it wasn't. There was no such thing as the canonization of the Bible for another 3 centuries after Jesus. So, I mean, in other words, the Bible that they had was literally the Septuagint, the Old Testament as their text to defend, guess what? The resurrection of Jesus. Can you imagine every Easter, no New Testament canon to work with, just Old Testament. You're defending the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. You're giving sermons through the Old Testament on that. That's the New Testament. The New Testament is a compilation, specifically letters and a bios of Jesus and so on, to showcase why they're Christian and why they see the Old Testament as pointing to Jesus in that way. Anyway, so
I would also like to jump in on like the 66 books of the canon thing. So I'm sure that's like based off of the fact that like he uses stuff like the Apocalypse of the 12 Patriarchs and like Enoch, as well as other like ancient Near Eastern Second Temple texts. It's like Heiser is not deriving doctrine like from First Enoch. He's deriving doctrine from the New Testament and uses First Enoch as evidence for his interpretation of the New Testament, because the New Testament writers had a worldview, and it's like certain like Greek terminology, like we can get insights into what that terminology means by like reading stuff like First Enoch that would have been a part of the worldview of the New Testament writers, so we can understand what they might have meant by that terminology. So that's what Heiser's doing. He's not deriving doctrine from those texts. He's using those texts as a tool to derive doctrine out of the New Testament. Because like if I were to if I were to understand like a newspaper about like the political state of affairs in like Germany before and after 1940, I would want to read other material to know what was going on in Germany before and after 1940. It's cultural context. It's like that's what Heiser's doing when he cites Enoch and all the other apocryphal or pseudepigraphal works.
Well, I might,
so, oh yep, no, go for it.
I was just going to say, I mean, and I might say more clearly, I think, than any other Bible teacher I've run across. Heiser might properly be described as a biblicist. I think I remember in one clip he talks about the canon itself being his source data, right? And so anything outside of that is the way to judge it. I think he said in some other places is whether or not this idea has explanatory power in the actual source text itself, right? So for example, the reading of Genesis 6, does that help explain the weird things that are going on in Deuteronomy 32? Do these things fit or in Psalm 82 and so on and so forth, right? Does this concept make the text actually, does it answer questions that are unanswerable without it, right? Or puzzles inside of the text? And if it does, then maybe we need to consider that, right? He was very source data driven, and maybe that's not the right way to explain it, but yeah.
So I have two things to quickly share. Just very briefly on the term polytheism. So there is a work that Mike wrote for the Bulletin for Biblical Research, which is a bit of both, like a critical and also evangelical journal publisher. And in 2008, and it's called Monotheism, Polytheism, Monolatry, or Henotheism. Notice question mark. Which is it? And I kid you not, okay? I kid you not. The answer is, as Heiser would say, yes. There is no one. You can't isolate a word like is the Shema monotheistic? Well, yeah. Is the Shema polytheistic? Well, no. There are the deities literally in the same chapter. Does this mean it's monolatry? Or, henotheism? Which term adequately defines, as he says, toward an assessment of divine plurality in the Hebrew Bible, which term adequately defines the religion of Israel? So, as he'll say over here, like there you go, like he's just spoken about even the Shema and the first commandment, do not consign the other gods to fantasy, blah 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 blah. But I want to show you what he says in this particular paragraph. He says, treatments of the issue in the relevant passages about the Jewish and Christian scholars often assume the biblical writers spoke only of idols when discussing other gods, or that references to plural Elohim in certain passages are best understood as referring to human beings. These options are also flawed in that they bring theology to the text. What do we call that, by the way? Eisegesis. You are presupposing this theological filter and system that you presume is true, despite, centuries may have passed by where it's continued to be taught, blah, blah. The point is, the text is what it is, and then there's this theological thing floating around. It's the theology is not the text. So, these alternatives assume that a 17th century word, oh, how ironic, a very late term like monotheism, has or can rightly be imposed on the theology of Israel, and that without this term, it must be acknowledged that Israelite religion was indeed henotheistic or polytheistic. In other words, just to bring it back, subsequently to his later works, so this particular work in 2012, what Heiser's doing over here, by the way, I'm saying this directly here to Wave. So here's a subsequent article he wrote. Here we go. Notice the title. I'll zoom in more. Does divine plurality in the Hebrew Bible demonstrate an keyword evolution from polytheism to monotheism in Israelite religion? What? Okay, trivia question to everyone on the panel or outside. What is Heiser doing here? He's responding to the critical 19th century scholarship that says, and is still argued even in some circles today among the certain YouTube specialists that Falk and I have run into, who argue that, say, Yahweh and Asherah, right? Yahweh is coupled with Asherah in a literal way. That there's apparently a Yahweh idol in the first temple. That Yahweh is a son of El, like literally. Like, in other words, you have atheist, scholars, Bible scholars, who want to argue that Israel was once upon a time thoroughly polytheistic. Hey, Wave, newsflash. Heiser, in the field of critical scholarship, is going against the grain of that argument, saying, no, there was no Yahweh Asherah worship taking place in prior to the 8th and 9th century BC thereabouts. Oh, well, technically 7th when you're going down, like what Dan McClellan wants to argue and so on. So Heiser saying there was no evolution, which means when you notice this, when you take into account the divine council worldview, that then actually not only tackles and responds directly to these scholars who also argue for a quote-unquote divine council worldview, but then when you showcase, the Most High and, the second person, the second power, and there is no evolution. There's genuine, what you would define as monotheism, with respect to the council members that give their due worship to this main high God. And therefore there is no Asherah stuff. If there was an Asherah, coupling or polemic, a better way of saying it, polemic, that would be in passages like Proverbs 8, where you have Lady Wisdom, which, guess what? What happens to Lady Wisdom in the New Testament? Becomes masculinized as Jesus, because Hebrews 1 says Jesus is the apogasma, the glory, which, by the way, that term is used for Lady Wisdom, which, if Proverbs 8 is polemically engaging the Asherah stuff, because Asherah was seen as the wisdom element of El. So, you see, that's what's going on. But I'm bringing it back to Heiser here. Heiser, Mike, is not agreeing with these particular scholars who have an axe to grind and want to showcase that see, Israel is just an evolving, no different to any other religion that sort of evolves and accommodates, and so in other words, once upon a time there was a Yahweh Asherah worship, and so Heiser's being very conservative. He's anyone. I'm just okay. I'm just gonna. I want the people here to interact. Okay, Carrie, you've been very quiet. Yes. Would you fall off your chair? I mean, you have a female deity in Mormonism, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, and then Heiser comes in going, yes, there was an Asherah Yahweh coupling, which means at least on this point the Mormons are correct. What would you do if he did that? You wouldn't have the reaction that you had when leaving Mormonism,
right?
If Heiser said that.
Right. Well, and people, LDS people try to take Heiser's work and use it, but it's ironic because he actually published in a BYU journal against Mormonism, and part of me thinks that a lot of them don't realize that's exactly what he was doing, was being against LDS theology, but maybe some of them were like, oh, we can take it, it's all right. It's like, yeah, this whole idea of just taking bits and pieces and trying to say that this is what Heiser was saying, it drives me bonkers, because you can do that with anyone and anything. And the fact that he is putting it in a better framework prevents the entire idea of Mormonism, because Yahweh as an Elohim that is not the same as Elohim, right? The idea of theosis as we are not becoming God, but we are becoming conformed to him. All of it, and his whole defense of the Trinity is that this is something that I find really interesting. In fact, whenever I get to talk to LDS missionaries or something like that, I try and bring that up, and this blows their mind if they're able to listen to what I'm saying. A lot of times they can't even hear what I'm saying because they don't want to or whatever. But if I bring this up, it's like, it's mind-blowing, and they don't know what to do with it, because when you formulate Heiser's ideas correctly and you present them to somebody from the LDS faith, they have to try and bring what he's saying back to their theology, which means that he's not propping up their theology, right? He's not saying anything that an LDS person can genuinely take if you give them what Heiser is actually talking about, which completely demolishes their arguments. But yeah, and the other thing I want to say, because I have to log off actually here in a little bit, so I just want to say for a second that one thing that they keep on talking about Nunnally will keep harping on the fact that somehow Heiser isn't talking about the gospel, and Nunnally never defines what the gospel is, and he just kind of name drops Jesus instead of really talking about the gospel at all. But what's fascinating to me is that Heiser's formulation of everything broadens the story of the gospel. It helps us understand what Jesus is doing, why he's doing it, and why it matters. Mm-hmm. If we are actually part of the body of Christ, then even before we get to this level of theosis, we are still part of what God's doing. And we are still this idea of participation, this idea of Jesus doing so much more than just coming for one tiny little thing in Genesis 3, but is actually coming from a perspective of fulfilling creation from Genesis 1 itself. And so the Bible doesn't start in Genesis 3, it starts in Genesis 1. And Jesus coming into creation to do all of these things, it's like this layered, beautiful picture that I just wish people could see what that is and how that speaks into the gospel, because it's such a more layered, and it brings the gospel to more passages in the Bible than we normally will find it in if we have that truncated view of he's only coming because of Genesis 3, right? And you see the layers of the primeval history in Genesis 1 through 11, and how those are actually wrapped up in why Jesus came. You have the formative story of Israel, the Exodus. That's part of why Jesus came and points to Jesus as being the incarnate deity. And yeah, it's frustrating, because when you have this truncated view of either the Bible or somebody's arguments like Dr. Heiser's, and you're not hearing them correctly, it's not that, I have to be personally offended that they're wrong. Like, we're all wrong, right? We're all going to be wrong, and that's not the point. The point is that we need to bring it back to Jesus. And so if people are decrying the fact that Jesus or that Dr. Heiser isn't doing that, it's like, no, he's doing that on a bigger and wider level. So
he highlights the gospel by showing how it fits in the biblical meta-narrative.
Yep. And before you go, I want to quickly share two things and a funny the first 10 seconds of a hour-long video I made compiling all the Naked Bible podcast stuff in response to a guy named Dan McClellan, who happens to be apparently from the LDS tradition, but is more just gone off.
He's a secular Mormon.
Yeah, he'd be what do you call a secular Mormon, but his views are just out there when it comes to Bible stuff. So, but it's not in regards to him and so on. It's just to show Dorian, welcome to what Heiser has been doing, and clearly you're just oblivious. So I'm just trying to help to show you, look, here's some examples. So, first two chapter headings, and then that clip. So, in his book, I Dare You Not to Bore Me with the Bible, there's a chapter called God's Right-Hand Woman, Wisdom in Hebrews 1. And don't forget, this is a work that then leads to, Heiser's being very careful in building up the argument that those who assume, because of the feminine nature of certain terms here, that, therefore God has a woman, by his side, right? So he argues, nope, that's not the case, which then leads to his sequel book, The Bible Unfiltered, in chapter 27, where he calls it Yahweh and his Asherah. And in this, he breaks down, again, the scholarship about what is this Asherah being. Is it an actual deity? Potentially it is. What about Israel? Did the Israelites have some sort of Asherah worship? The answer is yes, but they were a minority group. They're the ones that actually committed idolatry. Then, is there any polemics involved? Yes, there potentially is. So as he says over here, in conclusion, he says, it is quite another thing to argue that this inscription proves Orthodox Israelites once worshipped a goddess. The inscription offers no support for this idea. You see, stuff like this. Is Heiser a polytheist? The answer is no. Okay? He's staying right in line with mainstream Orthodox Christian beliefs. Okay. And then finally, with a little tongue-in-cheek edit over here, I want to show a snippet of what Dan McClellan says, and then what Heiser then, how he reacts. Just for a little bit of humor here.
The only theology that we can reconstruct from before the reign of Josiah and the rise of the Deuteronomistic literature in the 7th century BCE has absolutely nothing negative to say about Asherah at all.
What? Doesn't make any sense.
And that's... and by the way, Yes, that was out of context, that clip, because, by the way, that doesn't it make any sense clip was actually to do with those who argue that John 10 and Psalm 82 are about human judges, and, you know. But that doesn't make any sense is used again with respect to the Asher argumentations. And notice how timely this is, Kerry. When he was doing his first Samuel episodes before he passed, when I was waiting, I was like, yes, you've done an episode on, say, chapter 7, because that's where he starts to engage with the Asher thing. So just before he passed, he finally was engaging head-on the critical scholarly engagements with this particular topic. Just gems, just even more than in the prior episodes where he spoke about the Asher stuff. And that then became a vital ammunition to respond to the fuller video of Dan McClellan. So anyway, it's there on my channel. That's a little bit of the introduction. But again, I'm just wanting to point out to you, Dorian, that Heiser's doing a lot of work against those who attack the Bible, and Heiser's not making up his own religion or his own denomination or something. He's just defending the Bible, you know, from an orthodox conservative perspective. That's all he's doing. I'm just becoming like a broken record, just repeating that. Like,
no, so, Robert. Of course, he was defending liberal scholarship.
Yeah.
Ironically, though, the two groups that we've been talking about, like higher criticism and LDS, is the two groups that he's about to accuse Heiser of being, quote, bedfellows with. So.
Yeah. And then when he says that, boy, am I going to play that moment clip where he points. We don't even have to. He points to the thing and he's like, "Show this to your friends."
We probably don't even have to talk for that much about that, just because we've already covered so much of it. Like,
yeah. No, but you and I are aware of the clip.
Yeah, the clip
I want it published live on this response video.
Dude, it's so good.
Out of the horse's mouth. Okay, so let's continue with the clip.
Yeah.
Language out. I'm happy to do that, but I think you guys know what I mean. Theology or belief system and how you live your everyday life in favor of books like First Enoch or pre-Augustinian early church fathers, some rabbinic sources that will even make reference to this divine counsel that Heiser talks about, that includes the God of the Bible, of course, but then other deities as well that are in one way or another related to him. And so what we have then right up front is Dr. Heiser is making strange bedfellows. On one hand, he's making strange bedfellows with the higher critical school of both Old and New Testament studies. And then you have the historical grammatical method that has been preferred by evangelicals for hundreds of years. Bernard Rahm, his book on hermeneutics, on evangelical or Protestant hermeneutics, etc. And
so just very quickly, when he brings up Bernard Rahm, I don't know why he said Rahm over there. Immediately I thought, oh, okay. You've just opened yourself up a little bit more as to who so it seems that Wave is, he would definitely be Young Earth, probably early date Exodus, probably he would venture into, I don't know, David Falk, if you're still listening, but like a Ron Wyatt potential. You know, like we're talking the cringe category of like basically the ABR, Associates for Biblical Research, like that lot that are very like, you know, the Scott Stripling type. So yeah, he's not in bed with the critical scholars. Rather what he's doing is something that Christians should be doing. What is the best argumentation you've got? Go for it. Heiser goes right in line with that. Attends the SPL meetings. Reads the relevant literature. What does that imply? His conscience is clear. Why is it that none of these so-called critical scholars in fact, I'll just say this with some of the Sentinel community. Have we ever seen a myth vision, critical analysis of one of Heiser's stuff? The answer is no. I find it interesting that his work is not actually criticized as wrong by the specialists in the field. Instead, probably the only pushback Heiser has received would be, well, we can see the logic and the dot connecting and all that you've made, which is fantastic. Which, by the way, Kip Davis said that on a Myth Vision, like after he passed that remark. And Kip is one for being a foul mouth, and here he's showing a lot of respect to Mike, where he acknowledged, look, the vastness of the way Mike was able to put all this together is even impressed Kip. But these atheists will still not say agree or have a faith conviction. Why? Because their bias is against anything supernatural or, God's existence and stuff. That's what's holding them back. Has nothing to do with his work. So how interesting. His work is seen as positive, even by the critics, because they can't fault him in their criticism of, say, Christianity. Which means the only people that they do go to criticize Christianity are the low-hanging fruit type, which would then be you, Wave. So, and in a moment, Wave will actually cite a particular person that I have had on my channel. If that is the guy you're citing, Christopher Hansen, who has now become transsexual. He's trans, so it's a she now. And she
transgender, not transsexual.
Oh, sorry, transgender. So she has written a review saying that the unseen realm, I think she used the term political or something like that, and that caught Wave's attention. If Wave only knew the other work that, I think her name is Chrissy, that Chrissy has now done with respect to Bible and so on, Wave, I think you probably run the other direction and be like, oops. This is no offense to Chrissy Hansen, by the way. That's a whole different discussion. But it's just interesting that I wouldn't do this, but the people like Wave, I would predict would do this. Not realizing that they've just cited a person that they would obviously call, sinful and heretic, to then respond to Heiser. There's a big disconnect over there. It's an imbalance. So, yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, I have to hop off, but thanks for having me on.
No worries, Carrie. God bless you.
Yeah, thanks for the discussion. Yeah, see you guys.
God bless.
So I think it's, if I'm right about this, it's kind of telling when he put that stink on the word other deities. He's like the divine council, which would include Yahweh and other deities. Like, it's like, I mean, I got that sense before. It's like other deity, the word God, and like they're placing all these attributes on that word. So of course he's going to have a stink with it because he's defining deity different than what Heiser would define it.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this before, but like whenever I first read Unseen Realm, like the way like I traversed through all that was just by placing like the divine council members in the same just ontological category as angels. Because like what I would ask Dr. Nunnally would just be like, well, okay, do you believe in angels? Do you believe in Satan? Do you believe in demons? Okay.
So, and exactly,
is there another, yeah.
And what ontological word would you designate an angel or demon and the word happens to be Elohim, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate that we're responding to something that he, like, if anybody knows what his thoughts on the word deity is, like how he's going to define that if he's going to use it, then I suspect that he doesn't use it the same as we would, like, or rather that deity isn't the word that Heiser even uses in that sense.
If you notice, they keep, like, almost until I think close to 2 hours in, I think there might be, if I remember correctly, one reference to the word Elohim. So they're arguing about the words in English, right? When the real concern is the Hebrew word, right? And that was always Heiser's concern, right? I mean, I don't remember any untoward pressure in any discussion I heard him take part in that I should use the word God for those other things. I use the word angelic beings, right? Because to me, that's more comfortable. It's less offensive to people. It's less triggering. And I think it's easier for people to get what I'm trying to talk about and not be triggered by, some, potential, idea that I'm trying to smuggle in, like the the Greek, the Greek myths or things like that, right? It's like those things are what they are, right? I don't put any weight on them. But what's in the Bible is important, and the way that Scripture uses that term is important. And I'm comfortable. I would be comfortable rendering Psalm 82 as angelic beings, right? I don't think it's people, but am I gonna, but the word there is Elohim, right? And the word there isn't talking about, the one unique Elohim, right? With the capital E, right? And it's, it almost. There are so many parts in this video where if you clip them next to each other, they're arguing against themselves, right? About 2 hours in, there's a part where the older gentleman with the beard, where he explains all the different ways in which Elohim is used, right? And Cooper, when he goes on his tear about it, and Nunnally, when he goes on his tear about it, they refuse to actually talk about the word in Hebrew, right? And they just stick to allegedly Heiser's confusing use of the word in English when Heiser's target was always the word Elohim, but
that was an interesting comment you pulled up, because I was just thinking, and maybe you've heard this before, God is not saying there are no other non-existent thing like me.
Yeah. Right, and not only even affirms that demons and and all the principalities and powers, that those things exist, right? In another section, and as do I think most of the other speakers on this video. So, well, what do you want to call them,
right? I'm just reminded of and I've witnessed this. I'm reminded of like when a grandparent passes away or something, and then a young child is comforted. Where is he now? And he's become like your guardian angel or something like that. Like you may have come across totally. I mean, there's usages of words and so on, but it's for the sake of the moment, and it's usually just passed off as just something as that, without any critical thought of what you've actually just implied, right? Now imagine in that same scenario, if you just blast your way into that discussion. It's a tender moment, and then you say, no, not a guardian angel, he's become a god. That would, think about it. What I'm getting at is that the pun of that joke is that phonetically, when you hear the word, like as Heiser would put it, God, suddenly you go, oof, no, he's not a god. He's just this angelic being or something. Your grandfather's like, he's not a god. You see, phonetically, we're so used to this reverence and this respect and this fear of like, oh my goodness, God, attributes. Do you know what you've just said? similar to that Star Trek scene in a movie, which I forget which one it is, but when James Kirk is like, what does a god need? Like, why does a god need a spaceship or something like that? He passes that remark.
Why
right?
does God need a starship?
Or something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Because again, he's thinking of God and what that implies, like omniscience, omnipotence, and blah, 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 blah. And strip that away from the word. The word, in the ancient sense, which would have been Elohim, had a lot of overlapping Venn diagram usages. Even as something as a lifeless idol is a god. Oh my goodness. So it's not, when you think of the word God and you apply it to like anything, like that's your God. You know, this thing is your God, and that's your, you know. Suddenly you've stripped it away from this like, ooh, don't go there. This is sacred territory with the word because of the phonetic, just the phonetic nature of it. No, there's nothing special about it. It's just the phenomenon of language. In other words, what sort of emotional reaction would he get? Would he get it out of Gott, the German variation of it? You know, God, which is sort of Germanic in English. What about the Japanese word for God and the Chinese word or the Indian word? Like, what about the Aborigines in Australia? Father Emu. Oh no, don't talk about Father Emu. Like, think about it. Like, the Father Emu is the god or the main deity, yeah, for the Aborigines. Which, just quickly, the Psalm 23, the Lord is our shepherd, we lack nothing. When Christian missionaries translated that psalm for the Aborigines, they literally saw it as the Father Emu. Looks after its chicks, and like, it's beautiful. If you're stuck in like an English, you're not multilingual and you're just stuck in that English sort of like closeted, echo chamber. These are, it's expected to have these psychological reactions the way like Wave is reacting. No. Just appreciate what the ancient culture was doing with certain terms and so on. That's why you have, in light of the term Elohim, that's why you have clarifications. I am El Shaddai. I am El Elyon. Right? Exodus 6:3. I was known as El Shaddai, but by my name Yahweh I was not known. It's only now that I'm revealing as, this Ehya, Esha, Ehya, like this Yahweh. Yeah, anyway, this is just common sense stuff. Like, this shouldn't be, time should not be wasted repeating and teaching this stuff. I shouldn't be saying this, especially to someone who has a PhD. Anyway.
Before we continue, sorry to disrupt the flow of the video. About the datings of Yahweh and Asherah, what time? I mean, what was the timings again that Heiser rejects? Like 9th to 8th century BC.
So the argument is that so you have Josiah's reform, okay, and falls into what they call Deuteronomistic histories. In other words, 1st, 2nd Samuel, Kings, and patches of Deuteronomy fit under a post-exilic Josiah reform and sort of like a cleanup, mop-up job of any sort of vestiges of polytheism pre-exile. And so therefore, especially all the mentions of the Asherah poles being destroyed in, say, Kings and so on, is nothing but a added into the text to clarify to the post-exilic Jews that, oh, no, this is also what happened before the exile. In other words, it's a conspiracy theory by the critics, assuming that the text was updated to shoehorn in a clarification, like, hey, no, there was a monotheism even before the exile. That's what these critics are doing. So Dan McClellan says you won't find, post-exilic monotheism from, say, around the 7th/8th century BC back.
Okay.
In other words, he will say, again, here's the other irony. He'll admit even from an argument from silence, and yet he still goes along with this argumentation. So it's an argument from silence that the text has been tampered with, and it's an argument from silence that there was, and I kid you not, there was an actual Yahweh idol with an Asherah idol. Simultaneous. I kid you not, in Orthodox Israelite, pre-exilic Orthodox Israelite religion. And that this Yahweh that the Israelites were worshipping was himself under El. What's the proof and evidence of this? Zero.
Yeah,
but
and also I would also
that's their assumption.
Yeah, and also point to Psalm 29 as evidence against that, because Psalm 29 is a demonstrably ancient text that clearly has Yahweh as the one at the head of the council. He's said to be the one who reigns above the flood, which what was the realm above the flood? It was where El would dwell. So yeah, I mean, also
and don't forget, how many thunders are, like 7 thunders or something in Psalm 29, because that corresponds to the Baal thunder stuff, and yeah.
And funny enough, the fact that, like, even if you were to accept the premise, which I don't really have much of a problem with, that like some Israelites would have thought that Asherah was Yahweh's wife. Even if you were to accept that premise, it's like, well, who was Asherah's husband in Ugarit? El. So that would only the idea that Asherah was Yahweh's wife would have only originated if there was a cultural mingling of El and Yahweh to begin with.
Yeah.
So yeah. We could talk more about that, but that's kind of a rabbit trail.
Also, just in conclusion, the closest you can get to, okay, for like, sort of like a pseudo conspiracy, the closest you can get to is Deuteronomy 33 verse 2. Because
that word is really, really messy.
Right. Because I'm just trying to remember. Oh man, this could be really deviating from the actual thing. But just, I mean, I could bring it up, but basically the King James has fiery law in Deuteronomy 33:2. It is a council scene, by the way. Myriads surrounding him. He descends down that mount, and it's all to do with Yahweh. And then it says, at his right hand, and then it's Ashidat. Scholars debate this. Like, is it a term that means mountain slopes? Is it to do with the right side of Mount Sinai? Is it law, like fiery law, as the King James translators try to do? But then people like Dan McClellan will go, the dot part is a deliberate smudging and like a confusion of the actual word that was originally there, and that is Asherah. At his right hand is Asherah. Here's the thing where things get interesting. Heiser will then go, tackling that full head on. Let's go along with the Asherah reading. Well, I just brought it up a moment ago. His right-hand woman. Right? What would be the polemical response? In other words, now notice this. Notice that people like Dan will say, Yahweh is subordinate to El. Okay, just as Baal is subordinate to El. So in other words, you have a Yahweh-Baal coupling under El. So El is not Yahweh, okay? Yahweh is not the Most High. Okay, trivia question. Whose husband is Asherah's? Is it Baal or is it El?
Let me guess, El.
Oh, wait, whoa. But then, so at his right hand, Asherah, which would be this marriage coupling, but that would mean Yahweh is El, the Most High.
Yeah.
If he's Baal, he can't, Asherah wouldn't be at the right hand. So then what happens is, so they know there's that contradiction. So then they're like, oh, maybe there was some sort of like confusion of the original pantheon. And that's, again, notice it's just assumption upon assumption. Yeah. But then, what other, qualifications or like, features of Asherah are there originally for, outside Israel? Wisdom. So Asherah becomes decoupled into being the wisdom of Yahweh. So it's the wisdom at Yahweh's right hand. It's not that he actually had an Asherah, which then, Proverbs 8, and then finally down the track, Logos theology of Hebrews 1, the apogasma, Oh my goodness. It's demythologized all this nonsense into a beautiful theology of, in this case, the Trinity and stuff like that. So,
yeah, and to like tie this back to like the video we're responding to, like let this demonstrate that like Heiser is not making bedfellows with higher critical scholars, like at all.
Mm-hmm. No.
So, yeah.
By the way, I would imagine that Dan McClellan would use Strapavoyu's work to demonstrate how Asherah was somehow once El's wife and is now Yahweh's wife. I would imagine that as a hypothetical.
All right, let's continue with the clip.
Sure.
A higher critical school, the more left-leaning or liberal approach to Old Testament studies, they've been saying this for several hundred years. Then the other side of it is with another strange bedfellow and again, he's still able to gain traction within the evangelical movement. We have never accepted the methodology, the presuppositions, or the conclusions of the higher critical school, and yet here we are now with it in our backyard via Dr. Michael Heiser. The other strange bedfellows that we are...
Yeah. Here we are with it in our backyard because that's the whole point of evangelism.
Yeah, he's building bridges. Like, that's why he attends the SBL, like, stuff. Yeah.
Anyway, I don't have to spoon feed the obvious, so I'll just continue with the clip.
That he's managed to make is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Right.
Because in using different terminology, they come to the same conclusion that we are going to be the God of our own planet. We're going to have our own territory that is ceded to us. And I really have a hard time finding either one of those bedfellows compelling, as an argument to make additional converts to Heiserianism within evangelicalism. Archaeology is demonstrating.
All right, so there's the big oops. So, folks, seems like I don't know what sort of interactions Dorian and the rest have had, but I want to share you this little nugget, which I actually had the original, more higher res version of this, but for some reason I lost it. But thankfully someone preserved it on YouTube from their own phone. And this is what happened.
I'm really glad you this is not going to be in the slide, but can I talk about the way Mormons misuse my content, specifically on the Divine Council?
Good.
observe carefully. Now, I've done this 100 times, and of course, this will be the time where it doesn't work. I'm typing my last name in there. This is Google. No one Google this. I could probably get this without typing Maxwell Institute in there. Oh, look at that, it's the top hit. This is my article published in a Mormon journal. I'm probably the only evangelical that's been published in a Mormon journal critiquing Mormonism. I'll tell you the story.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll skip the story, but I'll just pause it specifically, and I have the paper as well. You've seen One Elohim, you've seen them all. A critique of Mormonism's use of Psalm 82. 2007 work. Heiser goes into the backstory that there's this particular Mormon guy that attends the ETS and SPL meetings, admitting that all these cults, like Mormons included, they rely on, I kid you not, they rely on Orthodox biblical scholars to then tease out information for their own, agendas and means and so on. That was his admission. And then Heiser said, yeah, guess what? I'm actually going to be presenting a paper. I mean, I didn't plan this, he didn't plan a Mormon interaction. It was again, this is all providence at play. He's just like, look, for the sake of my evangelical folk right in front of me at this biblical meeting, I've written a paper showcasing how Mormonism misuses his work. Oh, sorry, Mormons misuse his work. And then the guy goes, well, what incredible timing, because I'll attend it. And then that particular paper, that particular Mormon who happens to be the president of this journal article in BYU, then goes, you know what, can we have this published in our work? Because at least with a sense of like transparency, in other words, those on the outside, how do they view our work? And the way you've accurately defined not only our position, but you've also given some very good pushback against our position. It would be vital for, in other words, your work to be in our journal, so therefore there can be hopefully someone that can respond back. Sure enough, there was someone who responded back, which then Heiser was given the opportunity to respond back, which would be, a third paper in the works. In other words, he gave a second response. Now, Wave, or anyone on the, like Jordan Cooper, have you ever had that privilege? Have you ever had that providential moment where those who you may criticize from the outside, you're able to go behind enemy lines, so to speak, and actually not kill the enemy, but try and bring the enemy out into a saving knowledge, right? So I'm going to skip that whole like story thing, and I'll go specifically to this bit in the video, which adds to the humor of this.
Yeah, on a similar note, I think that's a good example of both how to be above reproach academically, but also how to be like a light to the nations in the academic world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
His name's Dave. Well, if Dave responds to the editorial process, they can change anything. Anthropomorphic language in Genesis. Points response to him was like, well, no. But they actually, yes.
Okay, so this is the bit which I'm going to slow down and play it at normal speed. So Dorian and the rest can hear it nice and clearly.
Published me in their journal critiquing them. Now, whenever I get the email, are you a Mormon? Do you realize what Mormons are doing with your work? It's like, yeah, I realize that, but show your friends who think that I'm agreeing with Mormons, show them this. If they want information, they'll go home disappointed. If they don't want information, nothing I say here is going to matter. They're just going to say what they want to say. So I'm interested in the ones who actually want to learn something, and can see. Here's the difference in a nutshell.
Okay, so that, by the way, that I'm going to quickly play that little last bit there, which is vitally important here. Notice very carefully what Heiser says.
I'm interested in the ones who actually want to learn something.
I'm interested in the ones that actually want to learn something. Undevelopment team, you've turned your camera off, but if you're there, I know your ears would have caught that.
Yeah.
If you want to make a comment on that, but that's, I remember in another stream where Heiser just bluntly said, just read more. Yeah, that's a vital component. It's heartbreaking. It's missing in the church at large. All right.
If nothing else, has demonstrated that ancient Israelites were very easy, quick to get off track, and that they had figurines of Asherah and Baal and Hathor and all kinds of. But that's not what's at issue. It's what ancient Israelites, either a minority or a majority of them, believed is not. That is not incumbent on us to live to that model. What is incumbent on us is to live according to the biblical model. And the biblical model, as we're discovering, even within the Pentateuch, where he's drawing a lot of his material in favor of this pantheon of gods or whatever, is within the Pentateuch. You don't have to wait to get to an Ezekiel or an Isaiah.
Yeah, we got an interruption there.
Rob just left the stream.
But
sorry guys, I pressed the wrong button and exited out.
It's all good.
But that's what I was getting from Heiser most of the time anyway, and that was an encouraging thing, like that information that he's putting out there is for people who are interested in it, and he's not trying to say, believe me, because he's using work of other people, but it's more like it's sort of that, hey, go read this. It's out there. Go look at it for yourself. It's right there.
Mm-hmm. Let me just quickly, if I can, look for a stream. Yeah, was it this one or was it this one? Ah, no, it must have been this one. So in this stream over here, there's Mike with a can you imagine this was 5 years ago? Okay, Mike with his pug, and somewhere over here, let's see, I'm going to play this at 1.5 speed.
Team project has a number of people in it. Down the road to help them out. 4, people there, and they're also going to be live streaming it. So over the weekend, Evans is there. I can almost guarantee that probably half or better of the people in the room will a decent bit of the book. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be the Socrates and the city stuff.
Fight the .pw because it uses.
I just don't want to be part of the problem, and I view part of the problem is people not studying. Journal.
Okay, all right. This is the bit. I found it. So someone passed a remark, and I remember this very clearly when it actually happened.
Cleanly and very orderly, and you're not dependent on catching something with your ear.
colossal waste of time that would be.
Fight the .pw because it uses the PW instead of .com, so it says fight the Dream Theater, Dance of Eternity.
Okay, so this is the moment. Someone asks Mike about James White.
You know, Matt, I would not waste my time debating James White for two reasons.
Chart. It's a wreckage
One
chart.
is I don't do debates because, say it with me, folks, debates are for the lazy. Okay. The other is that would be like debating a point of Greek exegesis with someone who's working only in the English Bible. You know, White has no feel for the ancient Near Eastern context. I don't even know if he's interested in it. If he is, he at all, he just doesn't get it. And he just refuses to interpret the passages according to their own context. So what a colossal waste of time that would be. It's, you know, it's just a waste of time. And again, I have a very low view of those things in general. So, you know, I just don't do them. To me, and again, I'm not going to say, nor could I say that debates never serve any good purpose. I guess they do. I mean, I can, if I thought hard enough, I can think of examples where they do or did, and for somebody, I guess, I think so. But to me, they're almost part of the problem that I've kind of dedicated myself to helping to solve, and that is most people who listen to a debate don't want to study. They don't want to do the research. They don't want to put in dozens or hundreds of hours in something and really understanding a subject and being able to take it apart and put it back together again, really doing the grunt work. What they want is for you, the person doing the debate, to do work for them. Okay, I'm just not doing that. I'm just not doing it. If you want to know what I think, read. Okay, read. That's why I write things. And I write them under peer review, again, so people who know what they're doing in terms of Old Testament Semitics and all that kind of stuff, they evaluate what I'm saying and then they, vet it, they publish it. So.
I'm just trying to, word this. Do you really think that debates are for the lazy?
I do.
Well,
I really do. I just,
how do you defend that, really?
Because people want someone else to do the work for them. They want to sit there and listen to a little snapshot version of a subject instead of getting into the subject themselves.
But what if they get into it and then they're also interested in this?
Okay, why wouldn't they get into it and be interested in it if they actually read a book or an article?
Well,
because the book or the article can actually lay out a subject very, very cleanly and very orderly, and you're not dependent on catching something with your ear. Reading is just more substantive.
But you're dependent on catching it with your eye.
I know, but reading is just more substantive, because if you don't get something, you go back and reread it again.
I think debates can be useful in the context of supplementary learning. And I also just want to have this conversation to see if we could debate over whether or not debates were useful. that's my only stake in this.
Yeah.
I just want to see if you catch that.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many things that I'm supposed to be doing. I would feel like I would need to repent. Like, honestly ask forgiveness if I wasted time on doing stuff like that. I'm not trying to be funny. I'm being totally sincere. I have too much to do. Then bother with that. If White wants to, debate.
All right, so this is the relevant bit. So he's just laid all that out. And notice very carefully what he's about to say in regards to White himself, his views of Psalm 82, and what he would need to do to really make an impact to have his thesis make an impact, because of the volumes of work that's been written on that psalm.
To do, then bother with that. If White wants to debate something, let him write a peer-reviewed article. But then he has to interact with all the research. And it's not going to be in a biblical studies journal where he's going to be, again, where people are actually vetting. Again, people who do Old Testament Semitics will be vetting this work. It's just not going to happen. So I just think.
All right. So trivia question. Jordan Cooper. We haven't yet, come up to your bit, but what are you again? You're a systematic theologian. Are you a Semiticist? Do you specialize in anything ancient Near East? Do you specialize in Old Testament intertextual stuff going on? The answer is no. Doesn't mean you're a nobody. It just means your systematic theology could be outdated. Because what school of systematic theology are we dealing with? Well, you're obviously Lutheran. But is that school of systematic theology, does that engage with the latest in the critical research on anything to do with textual issues, ancient Near Eastern intertextual stuff, all that stuff? Like that's an honest question for you, Jordan.
If we get our theology from the Bible, then at that point, like, exegesis should precede systematic theology in terms of importance.
Like, in other words, systematic theology is, there's massive rooms of improvement, revision, deletion if required in a systematic theological book. It's not here's a systematic theology of, say, angelology or something or whatever, and God proper, and Israel, and no, there are entire dissertations. For example, there's a Messianic Jew of the name Arnold Fruchtenbaum. Okay, he wrote his dissertation for New York University that was originally 1,100-page manuscript. That for the sake of dissertation limits, he had to truncate that down to like 400 pages or something. But then he released his full manuscript. He published it as a book, as an actual monograph, like afterwards, called "Israelology: A Missing Link in Systematic Theology." In other words, systematic theology is not a closed system. It's not a complete thing. There's always room for just constant additions and so on. One of which would obviously be, as people were hoping for with a book review, right, is sort of like systematic theology of the divine council worldview, right? I personally am not interested in that, because a systematic theology of that would just be, if you combine all of Heiser's works in that.
Yeah, it would just be unseen realm.
Yeah, for me, I'm more interested in. I don't know if you saw my post in the Facebook group, but there's a famous question that was asked, tucked away in the Naked Bible transcript. Why Canaan? Why the chase to Canaan? And Unseen Realm 2, the sequel, would have focused on that. Yeah.
Also, I'll probably have to head out. I'll be back in like 10 minutes, though. So.
Yeah. No worries.
All right.
No worries.
Yeah, shall be back. See ya.
Okay, let's continue with the main video.
Not that I'm like sort of in a defense, but also not technically defending. It's okay to have an opinion of something that you're not an expert in or that's not your field, but don't try to use your opinion to usurp the data or the experts or anything like that. That when we have those opinions, when we have those thoughts, and it's not our field, what we should do is take that to the people who are experts in that and ask them about it, ask other people about it that may have that information.
Bingo. Yeah.
See what they think about it. That's your peer review. That's your
and that is ironically part of what it means to systematize or be systematic.
Right. I say a lot of dumb things, and I have an opinion written article, but I'm not presenting it like it's truth, because I'm holding myself back from that and saying I don't know if anything that I've written is worth anything until I send it out there and say, what do you people who are, deep in studying this think of these things? And then I'll get that back and look at what I've done. That's not something that I would have done a couple of years ago, because I was in that very mindset of, if I have a thought, it must be right. So I got to like put this out there. Just a little bit of self-control is going to take you a long way.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of his material in favor of this pantheon of gods or whatever is within the Pentateuch. You don't have to wait to get to an Ezekiel or an Isaiah and the like to come to this position of radical monotheism. It's already there within Moses. But in reality, the decision to jettison the foreign gods that Abraham and his family worship beyond the river, quote unquote, Abraham.
Radical gods, it's already there.
So he makes the charge, Rob, of Heiser entering in rabbinical views on things, but the rabbinical view on angelic beings is that they have no free will, right?
Which would ironically fit Islam, because in Islam they have no free will, because that's their attempt to explain how they can never fall, which the Bible contradicts that, because free will is a necessary component to showcase that they actually have because I've asked Muslims this: if they have no free will, why do they worship Allah? Like, how does worshipping Allah work in a non-free will environment?
Right, but specific to the angelic beings, though. So here's the issue, right? A friend of mine who's a rabbinical Jew, he calls Christians Enochian, right? He says we're an Enochian sect that split off from Judaism. The reason he says that is because we believe that there is such a thing as angelic rebellion. And it's funny too, because like somewhere in this video, Heiser gets accused of teaching the exact opposite of this, strangely enough, when he talks about Satan. But for that rebellion to be real, right? Angels have to have free will, right? Otherwise, they're fighting against God because God told them to fight against God, which, strangely enough, that's how the rabbis actually put it. So the question I would have for the doctor here, does he believe that the devil is really in rebellion against God, right? And if so, then they have free will, which, according to Jewish folks, right, isn't monotheistic anymore. Yeah, they would call us polytheist or henotheist or something along those lines for just for that, right? Forget about the use of the term Elohim or lowercase g gods, right? Just by virtue of so is that what he holds, right? And I jokingly call it monad theism. I'm not sure what exactly to call it, but I think that's what he's actually describing here.
It definitely does seem like it. Like, according to some Jewish sects, an angel is apparently a quote-unquote a part of God's body or being. It's like when we describe an attribute of God, we give it a name as if it's its own latent entity. Like, it's definitely something along the lines of like the Kabbalah, which is definitely inspired by monistic philosophy. But yeah, like, it's definitely along those lines.
I just want to bring up a not connected to Heiser, evangelical scholar, John Goldingay, who, by the way, Heiser cites, actually. So it's the other way around. He cites him a lot in Unseen Realm and in other works. So this is Baker Academic. They released a brand new series called the Baker Commentary on the Old Testament series. Goldingay has written on Joshua, Genesis, and I think on the Minor Prophets so far. Now, as you can see, as 2020, very recent. This is his translation, his original translation. That's one of the beauty of Goldingay's works, is that he actually takes the time to make his own fresh translation. So remember, Wave just said, strict monotheism, no mention of these other gods, blah, 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 blah. Well, let's just go right to the start then, shall we? So you have God, right? Talking in the plural, let us make. Okay? Who's the us speaking then? Literally in the first verse of the second chapter? Well, who's the us that Yahweh is speaking? Well, it says, so the heavens were finished, and the earth, and all their army. Now, some translations will say vast array. For example, the ISV has it this way. Let me zoom in a little bit more. Including all their vast array. But do you see a footnote? Now, this is a very, very conservative evangelical translation. And I personally use it. if you click on this footnote, hosts, i.e., armies of sentient beings, or stars if referring to the night sky. Why do the translators realize that it could be a both and? It's because the term is used later in the prophets. Yahweh Sabaoth, Yahweh, the Lord, Lord of the heavenly armies. So what then does Golden Gaze say in his commentary on that? He says, well, God has completed the work of creating the cosmos and its army. The latter term applies directly to the heavenly host. Well, in this case, the sun, the moon, and the stars. They are the forces that Yahweh controls and makes use of in governing the earth, and to whom, now notice this, to whom Israel will be tempted to bow down if they were gods. So the creation story has anticipated, and this reminder of Israel that these entities are part of the created reality. So wait. Have you seen the citations in what critical scholars would call Deuteromistic history, right? But have you seen that these citations are exactly the citations Heiser uses in Unseen Realm? Deuteronomy 4:19, 17:3. So if we go specifically to 4:19, it says, "Do not gaze toward the heavens and observe the sun, the moon, the stars, the entire array of the sky, with the intent to worship and serve what the Lord your God," notice, "gave every nation." Because see, that whole giving every nation is 32:8, disinheriting humans, putting them under the other gods. And they then in turn will correlate with, in their traditions, Shemesh, the sun deity, Sin, the moon deity, and and on it goes. So yeah, just a little bit of a side example. Here you have someone like Golden Gate in a evangelical commentary arguing for a multiplicity of divine beings under the guidance of Yahweh all the way back in the creation story. Okay.
Made that decision. The father of the faithful made the decision to jettison the belief in and the lifestyle based on a pantheon of gods, a plethora of gods. You can call it divine council or whatever, but a many god approach to faith and life. We
I just love how he goes, a divine council or whatever. Does he not realize that that term occurs in the Old Testament? It's an actual scriptural term. El's court.
Stand in that same stream, and I'm really not willing to jump out of that stream and onto the bank of Dr. Heiser, or on the bank of the higher critical school of Old Testament studies, or anyone else that would suggest on the bases that Heiser has laid down that we do so. If you're looking at Genesis 1:26, or if you're looking at other passages like Genesis chapter 6 and the Nephilim and the sons of God passage, that instead of running to First Enoch for our authoritative interpretation of that kind of material, that we run to the authoritative interpreter of that material, who is Jesus of Nazareth.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
He's a much more reliable source. And whoever wrote the book of First Enoch, he didn't die for me. So Jesus has literal skin in the game. First Enoch is a literal treasure trove of ideas and terminology and theological development and that kind of thing, interpretation, that author's interpretation of various scriptural strands of information. It is a very valuable document. It's just as valuable as some new inscription or some new fortification or whatever that an archaeologist would find. I call myself a literary archaeologist as opposed to a literal archaeologist, because I dig into literature, into words and language and ancient text, as opposed to digging into actual dirt. All we're looking for is information. We're looking for evidence. we're looking for, and I teach my students this, I preach and teach and write like this, is we're looking for all kinds of information flow that comes from geography, linguistics, ancient texts from the Old Testament and pre-Old Testament period, from the intertestamental period and that kind of thing, from archaeology and the like. We're looking for all kinds of, it's a little bit like economics or finance, is that you want multiple income flows. We want multiple information flows, but that doesn't mean that that becomes the prism through which we look to understand biblical text and then apply that to our faith system or theology or what we believe about God and worldview and the like, or how we live our everyday lives. And so that's a gigantic jump. If you do that, once you've done that, then you have basically accorded scriptural status to that document. And whether it is the book of First Enoch in the pseudepigraphical material, or if you're looking at the book of Tobit in the intertestamental apocrypha, or you're looking at Mechilta Rabbi Ishmael in the rabbinic corpus, or you're looking at the Gospel of Nicodemus in the New Testament apocryphal stuff, you have still departed from that 66 book canon that is our rule for matters of faith and practice. And every evangelical group that I've ever had anything to do with, and all of the major statements, the Chicago Statement, the Lausanne Statement, the Baptist Faith and Message, the Assemblies of God Statement of Fundamental Truths, it's ubiquitous. It's all over the place. The Bible is our rule for matters of faith and practice. So anytime that you attempt to elevate,
hold on, because now he's made a very interesting spiel there, where he says, you know, we have all these means of gathering information about the Bible, but we rely on the Bible. It's like, but you don't even know, like, you couldn't even translate that without the work that you just said is used. So what is your interpretation of the Bible? Do you even have a basis for relaying to us what your view stems from? Like, well, no, he didn't relay that.
So Paul in Acts 17 on Mars Hill, I see that you guys are very religious in every way, but I'm not going to appeal to your poets and so on, because I have a 66-book canon that for some reason has no mimesis categorization. It has no polemics. I'm actually deliberately ignorant and oblivious to anything that you believe in, because you're Satan worshippers, and how dare you have these ideas, and it doesn't align with the word of God.
Right. You know, I know
it sounds, I mean, I'm being, again, facetious, but that's what you say.
Right. I know I make this joke sometimes with certain groups of people where I say, you know, hey, Rob, don't you know Jesus wrote the Bible in the King James English? But it seems
if it
like
was good for
actually,
Paul, it's good for
yeah. You know, it seems like that's where people want to go when he's like, you know, we don't need to look at First Enoch because we have Jesus. Well, quote something from Jesus to defend what you're saying then. But he doesn't even do that in that moment. We're just supposed to expect something like, yeah, oh yes, I agree with you. It's like that kind of, like, agree with what? You got to say something, bring us something, quote something, reference something, give us something to go on. What are you working with? I know what you're not working with.
Like when Jesus says, healthy people don't need a physician, but sick people do. That's a famous Spartan proverb. That was we can trace it back to an actual Spartan guy saying it, which then became, you know, the famous, like anything that becomes like a saying, right? In language. So is Jesus giving an appeal or something? No, it's just, that's the milieu. That's what, this is language 101. Enoch.
And the contrast there is, and I had an interaction with somebody recently who was like this, where they were sort of a doomed street preacher type person. And I was just asking them, like, where do you come from? Like, what's your congregation? Who are you accountable with? And they just said, nobody. They're on their own. It's their own dream, their own interpretation. And that, you know, they receive this from God. It's like, so their filter is their themselves today. And that's how they interpret the Bible.
Yeah, in light of like Heiser's treatment of First Enoch, the way I think about it is this: if I were to interpret a newspaper comic strip from the 1930s, and the comic strip makes a reference to the Great Depression, I am going to read other works from the 1930s to understand what the Great Depression is. Likewise, when Peter makes a reference to the spirits in prison, I am going to read other works, i.e., First Enoch, from the time of Peter to understand what the only
literally the only text in Second Temple literature that ever speaks about a descent to the spirits in prison. Peter's polemically playing a whole, hey, you had this. Sorry, I'm stepping on your toes by explaining it, but basically, Enoch, this fictional Enoch, actually happened in Jesus. Like Jesus actually did what you guys in this fantasy pseudo-biographical text, it actually happened. That's the point.
Yeah. Heiser is, I've said this before, but Heiser is not deriving doctrine from First Enoch. He is using First Enoch as a tool to derive doctrine from the New Testament.
But not Heiser, the New Testament authors.
Yeah, because the New Testament authors use it.
Yes.
So that's why it's important.
Yes. So now that we sort of just laid all that out, I'm gonna flex a little bit and show off to Dr. Fork, who's in the chat. This is my commentary on Daniel. Now, in a moment, Wave, I think it is, or was it Jordan Cooper? One of the two in this, maybe either Drew or someone else, you can clarify. They bring up that Jesus and pretty much everyone in the New Testament never ever cited First Enoch. Like one of them brings that up as a point. So let's just
Jude?
No, yeah, like one of them gives the example of Jude, but in other words, that's your one-off. But basically, the rest of the New Testament never ever, and especially Jesus, apparently, Jesus never quotes First Enoch or alludes to it. And the first thing that came to mind was what we call the Son of Man sayings. It's not Daniel 7, okay? Yes, Son of Man's in Daniel 7. But, yes, Dr. Fork, I'm going to show off to you right now something I discovered which made me go, historical Jesus studies and the Enoch seminar and Charles Worth along with Darrell Bock going like actually giving the receipts, which just made me, this is beautiful stuff, which you'll see in a moment. The point is, a Galilean ministry, right? Wave doesn't seem to realize that First Enoch is not one text. You have the Watchers section, you have the Similitudes section, you have all these various sections of First Enoch that are not written by the same guy. The Watcher section is way back. We're going like 300 BC, as far back as 300 BC, which then there's a debate now. Daniel 7 predates that or postdates it, but like who uses who? If First Enoch uses Daniel 7, therefore Daniel 7 predates that, which, boom, now you're going 6th century dating for Daniel. Anyway, coming back to what I put over here together. So I give a big summarization of Son of Man stuff. Notice I'm quoting Heiser right over here when it comes to the arising nature of Jesus with respect to the Gentiles. And anyway, I'll break it all down, right? Then when we come to point number 2 that I wanted to clarify, what's called the parables of Enoch, right? So the earliest interpretation of Daniel 7:13-14 is found in this section of Enoch, chapters 37 to 71. Since no fragment of this text has been found at Qumran, scholars initially proposed its date of composition after the end of Jesus' ministry. In other words, say 33 AD. But prior to the Jewish revolt, which is from 67 to 73 AD. So that used to be the argument. Now it's become quite interesting. Recent scholarship has argued from much early date. So notice you have the Book of the Watchers, chapters 1 to 36, which go from 300 to 200 BC. You have the Book of Parables, which is relevant to the Son of Man sayings in the Gospels. That's been re-put now to 37 BC. Then you have the other sections, Book of Luminaries, 200 BC, Enoch's Dream Visions, 160, blah, 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 blah. This is Charlesworth's quote. Notice it's a 2013 citation. The date and provenance of the Parables of Enoch. What I'll do is I'll quote the bold bits here. Dating the Parables of Enoch to the time of Herod the Great and the Herodians has become conclusive. The Parables of Enoch appear to be a Jewish work that antedates Jesus, and the author seems to imagine a connection among the Messiah, the Righteous One, and the Son of Man. Whoa! So here's a pseudegraphical text that already has Christian vocabulary as we understand it, pre-Jesus. Messiah, the Righteous One from Isaiah 53, Son of Man of Daniel 7, as being the one and the same person. The work most likely took shape in, guess where? Oh my goodness! So, this section, which dates to 37 BC, around the Herodian period, is made in Galilee. What do we see? A Galilean carpenter running around with Son of Man sayings. How convenient, right? In other words, here's this work that they already knew was just fanfic stuff with hints of actual Old Testament allusions and hopes and dreams and so on, right? It's like basically the recent Deadpool movie with Wolverine. I'm Marvel Jesus, as Deadpool would call himself. But obviously, there's fourth wall breaking polemics at play, right? In other words, imagine an actualized Iron Man. Yes, there's a fictional Iron Man, but what if there one day becomes an actual Iron Man? So, Jesus is running around in Galilee. What if there's an actual Son of Man, Righteous One, Messiah in Galilee, as this Galilean text is arguing? You see, I just wanted to bring this up. Let's see if there's anything else I need to read. Okay, look at this. So I'll just conclude with Charlesworth's quote over here. He goes, this is relevant. In fact, this whole section here is very relevant to everything we've just been discussing. So I'll just read from... Okay, so yeah, from Galilee, not far from where Jesus entered his ministry. Thus, he could have been influenced by this writing. Oh, by the way, did someone join? Oh. Okay. He could have been influenced by this writing or the traditions preserved in the Parables of Enoch. In this case, his own self-understanding may have been shaped by the relationship between the Son of Man and the Messiah that is found only in, notice this, only in the Parables of Enoch. Who's saying this, by the way? Not Heiser, Charlesworth. Okay? Now, let's see what else he says. If those in the Enoch group were known as the great scholars who had special and secret knowledge. Okay, he's being a little bit deliberate with that term secret. He's not talking Gnostics. This is not Gnosticism and so on. And if they lived in Galilee, then Jesus would most likely have had an opportunity to learn firsthand about their teachings through discussions and debates. Some of the Bultmannians, notably Councilman, these are the German scholars, claimed that the Son of Man is a term and title that originates only in the post-Easter community. Now notice this. This is part of the historical Jesus studies, Jesus seminar stuff. Post-Easter, post-resurrection. In other words, the church invented the Son of Man sayings. Okay? Councilmen argue that all the Son of Man sayings in the words of Jesus are suspicious. They seem to be the creation of Jesus' post-Easter followers. The Son of Man Christology is not linked to Jesus. It originated in the church, which in my estimation should be renamed in order to avoid anachronisms, the early Palestinian Jesus movement. According to Councilman, in the early church, the term Son of Man first appeared as a title and celebrated the earthly life and celestial origin of Jesus of Nazareth. That, in other words, the title reveals nothing about Judaism or the historical Jesus. It ushers us into the world after Jesus, when Christianity begins to separate from regnant Judaism. Okay, before I keep reading. Wave. Welcome to Critical Scholarship, once upon a time saying that. Now you, as a conservative Christian, would be like, no. This sounds like this is just no different to, again, religions and religious groups just coming up with stuff, right? Like for example, with Islam, Muhammad passes away, and then boom, you have the Quran and the Hadith and all these traditions. What does Charlesworth now say? He says, many specialists are now saying more clearly that New Testament Christology flows from Jesus' words and self-understanding. This is not by Christian scholars, mind you. Charlesworth is appealing to agnostic and atheist specialists in the Enoch seminar, saying this. Councilman's Professor Bultmann stressed that the message of Jesus is a presupposition for the theology of the New Testament rather than a part of that theology itself. These scholars, Bultmann and Councilman, were... Now, this is coming back full circle with earlier, when we were discussing about bias and if you're trained in, like, systematic theology stuff, right? Notice what he says here. He goes, these scholars were primarily trained in Greek and in the New Testament. They were not experts in Second Temple Judaism, and they should not be judged in terms of improved data and methodologies. Why? Because now, with more scholarship that's emerged, more research and studies that have emerged, you're actually defending the Bible and the Jesus of the New Testament is actually more true now. And in a moment, I'm going to bring up what Heiser says in regards to Genesis 6 with the same sort of argumentation here. So, if the preceding reflections are valid, then speaking personally, I would recast Bultmann's famous and influential dictum. He claimed that Jesus is the presupposition of New Testament theology. Notice this. Far more likely, Jewish apocalyptic and eschatological reflections on the Messiah, the Son of Man, God's kingdom, and the coming day of judgment are the presuppositions of Jesus' mind. So in other words, it's like Jesus, God in flesh, could just wink and smirk and, think, oh yeah, like when with that scribe, you're not far from the kingdom of God, like. But at the same time, he doesn't, mock them or put them down or try and trump over them with certain knowledge. He guides like a shepherd. He guides them ever so carefully, so that, don't forget, in John 14, the Spirit of truth will teach you and remind you of all these things. So now with the New Testament, the way we have it today, is designed for now scholars like, say, Charlesworth to in hindsight, with the discoveries that we've made, to go, oh, wow, yeah, you know what? The New Testament, we got it backwards. Because of our bias against the New Testament once upon a time, where we are presuming the church is inventing all of this stuff. Actually, the church is invented out of originally what Jesus was actually saying, which is ironically what we presume the church made, but really it wasn't. It was the other way around. The church, in other words, the church is recording the historical Jesus's actions and words.
Yeah, and it's like because of like studying First Enoch that like some critical scholars have come to the conclusion that like, oh, like maybe the Son of Man sayings actually are historical, because we would expect the historical Jesus to talk about that stuff because it was in the theological conversation of the day. So it's like, Dr. Nunnally, if you're watching, it's like that is a part of the reason why studying First Enoch and simple Second Temple texts is valuable.
Yep, and just to quickly show what Heiser says over here very quickly, the title of this chapter in his Bible Unfiltered.
That's an amazing title.
All your Genesis commentaries are 8-track tapes. And when it comes to the Apkallu stuff, it wasn't until 2010. So he says, let's see. Skip. Prior to 2010, that assertion, so in other words, the whole like understanding of Genesis 6 and that it's nothing supernatural and all that, may have been contestable. That is no longer the case. Recent scholarly work on Mesopotamian literature associated with events before and after the Great Flood have produced clear, unambiguous, point-for-point parallels to what we read in Genesis 6, 1-4. Those parallels demonstrate with no uncertainty that this biblical passage was specifically written to denigrate Mesopotamian ideas of the superiority of their gods and culture. And then he goes into the Apkallu stuff. Okay? And it's to do with Amir Anas, where he put all this together and published it in a 2010 journal, which means all the Genesis commentaries prior to 2010, at least with respect to this section of Genesis, are outdated. If there's any Genesis commentaries after 2010 that are transparent enough and good enough to engage with Anas's article, then at least that in other words, that's a telltale sign that scholar is not afraid to work with, Yeah, guess who worked with it? Golden Gay. I don't have to show. I'm just saying. It's a given. It was published in 2010. Golden Gay's Genesis is in 2020. Surely Golden Gay should have. Yes, he did. So.
Yeah, he also says that in Reversing Hermann too. And I was going to bring up earlier, I think it'd be a good time to do that. Also, in the index to Reversing Hermann, he has a list of like
all the First Enoch allusions.
Yeah, pseudepigraphal uses in the New Testament. And for the section on First Enoch, there's 60 possible allusions. So, I mean, out of the 60 of those, I'm sure some of them actually are actual uses of First Enoch. So,
yep. Mm-hmm.
All right, I gotta head out.
Yeah, we've been doing 3 hours and 30 minutes. Honestly, how much more? 2. We should do a part 2. I'll probably rename this and we'll do a part 2.
Lovely.
Wow.
That'd be great.
Wave talks for a good 54 minutes, and we've only done 21 minutes. So, all right, let's do a part 2, folks.
Awesome.
I'm all for it. If you guys want to come back again on another stream, let me know. And I don't know if I can do it. I mean, if I'm game, if you guys are game, we can do it again immediately tomorrow. Continue the or if you want to do it a day, not a fortnight, like a couple of days after, or
whenever you're free, and whenever you're able to get your times right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna do it in 10 minutes. Oh no, an hour passes.
That's 5 years in your time, though.
Yes.
We were waiting for the.
But hey, when it happens, it's good, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, also to the Heiser family, God bless you, and don't be troubled. I mean, we are not troubled by any of this pushback and critique. It's just we're baffled, disappointed, somewhat a little bit annoyed and angry, but that doesn't rob of it doesn't rob Heiser's legacy or the kingdom work that he's done, because there are people that are still benefiting from his work. It's benefited me, and I've made sure, like, I've taken the pains to accurately distill his work in my own work, in other projects and all that. So God bless you, and yeah, just keep the Heiser family in prayer, like outside this context stuff, just in general. But okay, so that being said, I hope this stream, in just the 16 minutes or so we've reviewed so far, and we've done this in like 3 hours and 30 minutes, so at least you can see the amount of content there is, esoteric Gnostic content that is not anti-Trinitarian or anti-gospel or anti-Bible. We just care about the data, and we have a high view of Scripture, and we're not idolizing Mike. We're not Heiserites. So yeah, I don't know what else to say, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just
I don't know if you guys want to say any last comments, but
yeah, I mean, I guess just like repeating what was said at the beginning, that the purpose of this is not to like defend our guy, it's to defend the church, by defending Heiser, because really not many other popular level scholars have really dug into the intersection between the Old Testament and Ugarit. So by defending Heiser, we are defending I think one of the church's greatest weapons when it comes to that particular field, because the church really doesn't have too many other weapons when it comes to that field. So yeah.
Yeah, and I have literally no patience for certain comments. The Sons of Thunder dude has been around the block basically since 2015, and I just
the guy who made a 9-hour seminar refuting Gnosticism is the Gnostic, apparently.
Anyway, see you folks. I'm gonna end the stream.
Yeah.
That's basically it. God bless.
Awesome.
God bless. See ya.